Well, everyone,
This
welcome.
meeting is being recorded.
I'll start again. Welcome, everybody, to the Norton Planning Board's meeting of Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. In case anybody wasn't aware, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th order suspending certain provisions, March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, and order of March 15th, voting limitation on the number of people gathered in one place. This meeting of the Town Norton's Planning Board is being conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Norton's website. To join this meeting and participate in the following ways: you can join online via video via the Zoom link posted on the agenda for this meeting. You can also join using the Zoom app using the meeting ID number 638-929-1060. There is also a dial-in number available on the meeting agenda. You can also view the meeting on Norton Cable Access, Channel 15, or the next day on the Norton Media Center's YouTube page. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In addition, please feel free to email questions to the board ahead of the meeting or during the meeting to Paul Giuseppe, the town planner, whose email address is on the town's website, and it's probably easier than me trying to spell it out. Additionally, you'll find meeting materials at the Norton Planning Board website. Again, every effort is being made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means, given what we are all dealing with in the wake of COVID. In the event we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we'll post on the Town of Norton's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other record of the proceedings as soon as possible thereafter. So, now that I need about 10 gallons of water after reading all of that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have still missing one member of the board, but hopefully they'll be able to join shortly. We do have a couple of sets of minutes to, yes, Joe is here, okay. Great. So okay. All members of the board are present. We don't have anything under planning board business and policies or bills and warrants in our folder. We do have 2 sets of minutes ready to approve by the members, both minutes for December 15th and January 5th. Are there any comments outstanding from members of the board toward either of those sets of minutes? We'll start with the December 15th minutes, which would be the oldest. I am hearing no comments. Hearing no comments, I would look for action on this set of minutes, assuming members have had a chance to read them. Otherwise, I would look to push this to a later meeting date.
This is Steve. Motion to approve.
Thank you, Steve, for the motion, and Oren for the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will go to the members for a vote based on how they are in front of me here on my screen. Oren?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Okay, minutes of December 15th are approved. Are there any comments of the minutes for January 5th, which would be our last meeting?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Second.
Thank you, Julie, for the motion and Steve for the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Oren, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And Scott?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. approve the meeting minutes of January 5th. And moving right along. The next item on the agenda is an A&R endorsement for 0 Rear Maple Street / Bolcom Lane. Is anybody here from, Paul, do you know if anybody
Mr.
from
Chairman?
this applicant is?
Yes, the applicant
Casey?
and the agents here.
Okay.
Yes.
So Mr. Behan and Mr. Casey.
Okay.
You want me to start it? Sure, Tim. Yeah.
Please do. You should have the ability to share the screen should you wish, but all of the members do have these files available to them in front of them in the Dropbox.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Timothy Behan with the firm Commonwealth Engineers and Consultants, representing Meridian Development, LLC. With me tonight is Ed Casey, an attorney and also manager of Meridian Development. I'd like to share my screen and just put up the subject plan. Let's see. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Subject property is identified as map 30, lot 5-1 at the Registry of Deeds. It's book 15852, page 185. It's zoned R60. We're proposing 3 lots, which front on a qualified way, which is Bolcom Lane. Ed will get into the details of the status of that lane. And all lots do have the minimum frontage of 150 feet for this zone. And we're here tonight for an A&R looking for approval.
Thank you. Just to confirm, the existing lot encompasses all 3 lots? All 3 of the
Correct.
proposed lots?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the
Yes.
members of the board, my name is Ed Casey, and as Tim said, I'm the manager of Meridian. And in order to maybe help you understand where this property is located, if you were to travel on Maple Street heading into Attleboro, shortly after crossing over the town line, Maple Street becomes Slater Street. And right at that curve, there is the entry to a subdivision called Meridian Meadows. It is a subdivision that has been constructed in 2 phases. The total number of lots within Attleboro is 12, as I recall. This roadway, the extension of Bolcom Lane, would create 3 lots that are in the town of Norton, but that would have the frontage on the roadway identified as Bolcom. Bolcom has been constructed in accordance with the definitive subdivision plan that was approved by the city of Attleboro, so that there is drainage, water, base coat, top coat, berm, and just about everything that we need in order to secure planning board approval with the submission of an as-built plan, and thereafter to seek the approval from the municipal council for the acceptance of Bolcom Lane as a public lane, as a public way. The 3 lots that were in the second phase of Meridian Meadows, those are the 3 lots that are opposite on the westerly side of Bolcom Lane. And those are lots that have now been constructed and they're occupied by homeowners. So those 3 lots were able to, the owners were able to apply for building permits, obtain building permits and construct, and then ultimately sell. I know that this is a bit of an unusual circumstance where you're being asked to endorse a plan, but I suggest that it is no different than we're at a subdivision in the town of Norton, because there is more than $200,000 that sits with the city of Attleboro right now to ensure that the roadway is completed. And I did a little bit of research, and Paul and I had an interesting exchange talking about whether or not Meridian is entitled to the A&R endorsement of this plan. And it's my view, that if you were to consider the analogy, imagining that this were a Norton subdivision and there was sufficient security for the completion of the improvements associated with the roadway, as well as construction of the roadway in order to ensure vital access, that one would be able to get a building permit for those 3 lots that are shown on the plan. If you're not persuaded by that analogy, I think that if you were to look at the language of Chapter 41, Section 81P, it speaks to the circumstances under which the planning board should endorse a plan. And I think that that section of 81L that speaks specifically to this references a way shown on a plan theretofore approved and endorsed in accordance with the subdivision control law. That means that the significance of the fact that the Attleboro Planning Board endorsed the definitive subdivision plan showing those lots on Vulcan Lane is sufficient assurance to you that you can endorse this plan knowing that the eventual owners of those lots will not be put in jeopardy as to whether the roadway will be completed or that there is at the present time sufficient vital access to emergency vehicles. So with that, I would ask that you consider endorsing the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Case. And I do see in our folder that we do have a letter from the city of Attleboro discussing the bond for phase 2 as well as their certificate of vote from 2018 on this phase 2 approval of the definitive subdivision plan. So thank you for providing those. Paul, the applicant mentioned that he'd discussed this at a little bit of detail with you. Do you have anything further that you'd like to add at this point from your perspective, or?
Well, and as you know from some exchanges, the thing that's a little unusual for the board here is that typically when we get an A&R, it's typically a constructed roadway that we would count as frontage. And in this case, as it's in another municipality, and we've seen from a couple of sources that the road is under construction. They're going through all of the permitting for it. They've identified, they've submitted funds for surety to ensure that the road was completed. So I just wanted to make sure that, because this one was a little bit unusual, that I tried to get the question answered about the status of the road being built.
Yeah, and I see on the A&R document itself, it does have that disclaimer that sometimes we request included, that the endorsement is not a determination in conformance with zoning or other regulations. So we are just putting lines on the map. We are not saying these are buildable lots at this point. Do any other members of the board have any comments that they would like to raise to the applicant? I know Amy is on the Zoom call in here, and she has provided an email, which is in our folders as well. Does anybody have anything to say further at this point, or?
Tim, this is Joe. I have left an issue with the A&R per se, and I don't know where these questions that I'm going to ask would actually be heard, but I'll ask them anyways here at the planning board. And I assume that the utilities that will be servicing the 3 lots in Norton are coming out of Attleboro. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So my first concern, coming out of Attleboro, 911 is going to default if one of those 3 houses calls. It's going to default to Attleboro. And I'm also concerned, but less concerned in terms of cable TV. Inland, I don't know who Attleboro now uses for cable, but it used to be a different cable company, not Comcast.
It's a double ACS now, Attleboro Area Cable System, I believe it is. Jim Jones runs that.
That's right.
All right, because 100 years ago, back in the 80s, there was an issue in that area because there were no lines running from Norton into. I'm trying to think. There was a problem with getting service to Norton because it had to come. The wires only came through Attleboro. I'm concerned that this will be a reverse problem. So those are two issues that, again, it's not really a planning board function. If this was a typical subdivision, maybe we'd be dealing with it. But this is obviously unusual. Have you considered those possible problems and how you're going to resolve them?
I think that the issue of the cable TV, I know that the homes within the subdivision, to my knowledge, have been provided with opportunity to connect with the local cable network, double ACS. I haven't heard of any.
But that's fine for Attleboro, but I don't know that unless you're going to run separate wire from Norton in and down that subdivision, the street that's under construction, how you're going to get Comcast wiring into that subdivision, because I don't think ACS will service or can service because they don't have a franchise for customers in Norton.
I understand that question, and it's certainly something that I can research, but I do know that the poles are located on the Norton side of Volcom Lane. So if those homes that are on the westerly side of Volcom Lane, opposite these three proposed lots, are getting service from double ACS, the poles are right there, and if there's not a prohibition against providing service to those lots in Norton, I wouldn't think that it would be that difficult to process, to accomplish. As to the the 911 issue, I've thought about that, and the hydrants are located in Attleboro, obviously. I don't know how that would be addressed. That is a question that I hadn't given any real thought to, and I don't know whether Tim has experience with that question.
No, not specifically for the 911 issue, no.
And one last question: are the utilities on Volcom, are they underground or are they aerial?
Aerial.
Okay. So it may, a possible solution would be to run lines separate using those poles, and that, again, that's a utility issue. But I've in the past run into issues where homes are in one community and the lines are coming in from another, and it raised all types of havoc. So that's something that again, I don't know how we condition the solution to this on an A&R, but it's a concern for me. I have no problem with the A&R, but those issues are going to have to be addressed before homes are occupied.
Well, Mr. Fernandez, I can tell you that I'll research it and report back to the planning board and see whether I can get answers to both of those questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do have a comment in the chat from a member of the public who says that for the 911 issue, there is a process to call and ask that that the phone number or the house number be associated with Norton for 911. And apparently there's a way that they can set that up in the back end. So,
Again, that may be true. I don't know that it's that simple. I dealt with this in Plainville. It was actually another state, and we had all types of strings to be told. But this hopefully is a little less problematic.
yeah, hopefully. But thank you, Joe, for raising those points. Are there any other comments from other members of the board regarding this A&R?
Tim, this is Oren. I just was wondering, Amy had chimed in with some comments to Paul initially. I was wondering if she had any comments at this point. Is she satisfied with what's been provided?
No, Amy Questle, Town Council. No, Oren, I'm not. It's pretty straightforward. Access has to be shown. And I don't know how you can, necessarily, I'm not sure how the town of Norton can guarantee that that road will be built. It's just, it's pretty clear that under the Perry case, this is a paper street. Almost all paper streets are approved by the subdivision control law, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to get built. And so that's.
Madam, Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that?
Yes, please.
Because this isn't a paper street. This roadway has been constructed. So we have drainage, we have base coat, we have top coat, we have granite, we have Cape Cod berm, and so there is all. It is, in all appearances, as if it were accepted or like any other roadway in Norton or Attleboro. It is not an unconstructed way, and for the remaining small items, we have more than $200,000 sitting with the City of Attleboro Treasurer's Office to ensure that the work is done in a timely fashion.
Mr. Chairman, I was informed that the road was not completed.
It is complete. Tim, would you respond to that?
Yes, the road is essentially completed. There are 3 constructed homes in there. They're fully occupied. They've been living there for many months, several months already. It's just we're at the stage where we're addressing punch list items with the city before the roadway's accepted. So we're in pretty much the bottom of the 9th inning, and the roadway's going to be accepted shortly. It's just there's some miscellaneous items like lumen seed on the side of the roads, items like that.
Do you have a projected timeline for when that would be accepted by the City of Attleboro?
I would estimate the growing season's probably Mayish, so probably shortly thereafter. If I had to guess, maybe June, it would be submitted.
Submitted in June and approved in, we'll say, fall?
Seems very realistic, right, Ed?
Yes.
Chair, just looking at the letter from the city planner, it said that should all these funds fall into place, the street acceptance process will commence in July.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. It looks like the lots on the southern side of that roadway. Are those occupied now?
Yes, they
Those
are.
are the homes they've been referencing as being occupied for the last several months.
Right. It's 12 lots in Attleboro that have been built upon. These last 3 on the westerly side of Bolcom in Attleboro, houses were constructed last year and occupied in the summer and fall.
Yep. There's a house on this lot here where my cursor is. There's a house on this lot here. There's a house on this lot here. And there's a house on this lot here.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any further questions from members of the board? hearing none, I think that, speaking for myself, I guess the two directions here are either to endorse the A&R, understanding that it's a little bit of a weird situation, and that we're not endorsing that they're buildable lots. We're just splitting up the lot lines. Or we look to ask the applicant to pull back the application until such time where the road is accepted, because otherwise we would run into a presumptive approval situation. So does anybody have any strong feelings about that? Amy, do you see any, now since given that the road is at the state where we feel it is now, does that change your feelings about whether or not we would be able to endorse this properly at this point in time?
No, it doesn't. The case law states that the road has to be constructed. If the board thinks that that there's adequate access, then the board can endorse.
Thank you. Okay. I'll open this up. Are there any other, we do have a number of people on the Zoom call today. I'm not sure if any of them are here for this session, but if they are, they can please feel free to submit questions via the chat or unmute themselves and discuss.
Mr. Chairman. So may I just add that my goal was to obtain the endorsement tonight. If there is uncertainty about the degree to which the subdivision has been put, that is that my statement or the engineer's statement is insufficient to reassure the planning board members that that the road is not sufficiently constructed, then I would offer an extension of time for you to act on this and thereby avoid the possibility of a presumptive approval for failure to act within 21 days. But my hope would be that if I were to do that, that the issue in your mind is whether that roadway has been built, so that whether it's Paul or someone else that goes out and visually inspects that roadway and then reports to you what he observes, that then would be sufficient assurance to you such that you were comfortable endorsing the plan. That would be great. I'd rather not, though, have Paul come back in 2 weeks' time, say, yep, it's constructed and looks great, and then have planning board members say, well, we're still not persuaded. If you're not persuaded because it hasn't been accepted as a public way, then I'd rather have you just proceed and refuse to endorse, because I don't think that that's the legal standard.
Mr. Chairman, I am not in any way stating that it has to be an accepted public way. It has to be constructed, and the board has to determine if, okay, thanks.
Yeah, we need to determine that access is adequate by our own standard. So thank you, Mr. Casey, for spelling that out. I would look for members of the board to take action on this one way or another at this point, given that there are no further questions.
Ken, this is Joe. As I see the plan, all of Bolton Road is in Attleboro. Is that correct? Like physical layout of the road? And I don't have the number in front of me, but Attleboro is holding something like $278,000 in surety.
Yes.
So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, again, with the A&R, I don't have an issue, and I will move to endorse has the planning board endorses the plan.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Joe, for the motion and Steve for the second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I will go to vote of the members. Oren?
Yes.
My order is a little bit jumbled here, so I apologize if you're not ready for me. Joe?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Scott? Scott, we didn't catch you there.
That was a yes.
Thank you, Scott, and I will vote yes. So the A&R we will endorse that.
Thank you very much.
Just for your edification, due to COVID, the town of Norton has approved a plan for a sole signer on A&R plans, which are filed with the registry, which will be filed to the chair. So you'll only see one signature on the Mylar when you get it, but there's nothing wrong.
And I'll respond to Mr. Fernandez as soon as I have the information through you, Mr. Chairman.
Please send any communication through the town planner, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
So 0 Rear Maple Street / Bolcom Lane is completed. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing for remand of special permit 486 and 491, which is 60 West Main Street, which is an application for a site plan special permit for a gas station and convenience store, which is also known as the Cumberland Farms project on West Main Street. Paul, I'm not sure if you or Amy wants to kind of give an introduction on the process here for the members of the public which are on the call, and then we can continue to move forward with what we have today.
Okay, so as you know, that some months back, the board had received an application here at 60 West Main Street and ultimately voted to deny 2 of the special permit applications, but also approved 1 special permit and the site plan. This was sent to Superior Court, and it has been remanded back. The application material is in your folder, and in fact, for the public, if you go to the planning board website, you will find the meeting material for this meeting there, so you can find that. So I guess, Chair, I'll turn it back to you, Ace, to get the application, or to the applicant.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Mr. Reedy, I believe you are here. It's been a long time since we've seen you. Now we get to see you from the comfort of everybody's home. So I will let you take it away.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. DiGiuseppe. Good to see everybody. For the record, Tom Reedy, attorney with Bacon Wilson out of Amherst, here on behalf of Cumberland Farms in this remand hearing. With me this evening, I've got a couple of familiar characters: John Marchand, our civil engineer from Farland, Maureen Schlebeck, our traffic engineer from McMahon Associates, and then we've got Nate Stevens from Kleinfelder, who provided a letter to the board relative to the underground storage tanks and the piping and dispensers, which he'll go over this evening. And kind of as Mr. DiGiuseppe had mentioned, so we had applied, it was back in 2019, November of 2019, for these approvals for the site, 60 West Main Street, for a 4,384 square foot retail convenience store with 6 fueling stations, 12 fueling positions. After, I think everybody here knows the kind of the history, what we went through, including a town meeting vote, a successful town meeting vote to allow a gas station in the Zone 3, ultimately received a couple of approvals, a couple of denials. in I think the decision was dated March 31, 2020, right at the beginning of all this. And so, there was an appeal filed with Bristol County Superior Court. And, in reviewing the decisions and corresponding with the municipal officials, we thought that it was probably in everybody's best interest to see if there's a project here. Specifically, we looked at the traffic, we looked at the safety. And so we have made some physical plan modifications. And Paul, I don't know if you've got probably the 8.0, if you've got it, the landscaping plan. If not, I'm happy to share my screen. It doesn't matter.
You can share it, Tom.
Okay. Why don't I go and do that?
And we see it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So what you have here, as far as we considered a couple of different things. We considered relocation of the building, but that was frankly impossible because of, once you start moving one thing, there's a domino effect, if you will. There, all of a sudden, it's tanker circulation. It's it's appropriate and safe internal site circulation. We looked at the curb cuts, and I think we have looked at this before. If most of you recall, it's trying to line these up, the curb cuts up, in relation to the property across the street. So if we started to move those, if we went down to a single curb cut, there would have been an issue with the tanker circulation, and it wasn't best traffic practice. We looked at relocating these underground storage tanks to put them back here. I think the board might have seen a plan showing those being relocated, and it was our understanding that that probably wasn't the best idea, so we kept them where they were. But one of the comments from the superintendent, and I think just good design, was to add screening, add buffer along the school property. And so what we did, really the only physical site plan change that we made was to add additional tree plantings in this area here. And so, besides that, again, reading the decisions, recalling some of the concerns from the board, we have agreed to, or have proposed to, I suppose, limit the fuel tanker delivery, to prohibit deliveries 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. And also 2:30 to 4 o'clock p.m. And so no fuel tanker deliveries would occur during that time, given folks' sensitivities to some of the surrounding areas and in the proximity to the school, frankly, and having the tanker come in and take up space on the site. We've also proposed, or would agree to, have a crossing guard. I think it's for the first 3 months of operation, of Cumberland Farms being in operation, to ensure appropriate bus and pedestrian traffic at the schools. And then just recently, and Maureen can probably talk about it in a little bit more detail relative to the traffic, was hearing back from the superintendent relative to his concern and his thought that a police detail would be required. We've agreed, or have proposed, a police detail 7 to 9 a.m. and 2 to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday, and we thought for the first 2 weeks of operation while school's in session. So obviously, if there's a holiday or a professional development day and school's not in session, we didn't think that the police detail would be required, but we're happy to provide the police detail, hopefully to set folks' expectation for during that initial Cumberland Farms operational time period, so that folks understand what the dynamics are going to be in that area. And so we're hopeful that with those items, and also we're here to talk about the underground storage tanks, which I'll have Kleinfelder do, and then Maureen to hit on any of the traffic. We believe and we're hopeful that, based on what we've just said, in addition to the findings of your peer reviewer back when we originally went through this process and effectively agreeing with our engineers, that the board can find their way to approve the special permit, and we've got two of them. One of them's for the gas station in the Village Commercial Zoning District, and the other is for the electronic message board, which is effectively a gas station signs. I don't want to minimize that or say it's a throwaway, because I think it should be addressed, but I think the primary one is the gas station in the Village Commercial. I mean, so with that, I'm happy to discuss any of those items that you want, but otherwise, maybe I'll turn it over to Nate. And Nate, if you could maybe walk through that letter, just with the safety of the underground storage tanks, the fuel lines, the piping, dispensing, etc. I will say that we have received all of the comments from the planning board, particularly one member of it, excuse me. We believe Kleinfelder's letter really addresses, and they're able to address kind of the overarching safety of having a gas station proximate to a school. And then we also received all the comments relative to traffic, and I think Maureen can speak to the methodology that's used, the Institute of Transportation Engineers booklet and data, and just any of the other items that had come up. So, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to address this however you want. I thought that maybe, with that, we turn it over to Kleinfelder and then to Maureen to talk about traffic, and then maybe take questions, from the board, and then move to the public. But you're the captain of the ship.
I think that would basically be what I would recommend anyway. So why don't we just keep going?
Perfect. So, Nate, I suppose I'll turn it over to you and let you run with it.
Yeah, that would be fine. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair Griffin, members of the board. My name's Nathan Stevens. I am an employee of Kleinfelder Incorporated. We are an environmental consulting firm and engineering firm, and Cumberland Farms is one of our clients. As Tom alluded to, I prepared a letter for the board's review regarding UST system design and implementation, and tried to address what I understood to be the concerns of the board. And if there's no objection to it, I would basically walk through that outline.
Thank you. We do have that available to us as well at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you. So in general, the UST system has several components. There are components made to store the fuel. There are components made to transfer the fuel from the storage into customers' cars. And then there's a series of monitoring and safety devices which monitor the system in real time. This particular installation is calling for two 20,000 gallon capacity USTs. As described, my understanding of the plans is that these are going to be split compartment. So there's literally a wall of fiberglass within each tank, which separates different kinds of product, different grades of gasoline or gasoline from diesel fuel. The tanks are made of fiberglass reinforced plastic. The reason this material is used primarily is its strength and its corrosion resistance. Historically, USTs or underground storage tanks were made of steel. That steel could be painted, or that steel could be what they call cathodically protected with an electric current or with a sacrificial anode, the way you would on a boat. Neither of those proved effective over the very long term, and so the industry as a whole has gone to fiberglass reinforced plastic. The tanks themselves have two walls. There is an inside shell which contains the fuel. There is an outside shell which is exposed to the ground and the groundwater. And between those two walls, there is a space. That space is referred to as the interstitial space. And having that space between the two walls affords two important items. The first is that, and maybe most obviously, it increases the strength of the overall construction. And second is that the space allows a place for monitoring the tank. Now, the tanks are monitored, as I'll describe in a bit, on the inside to ensure that the amount of product within the tank is what it's supposed to be given the delivery and the sales. But this space allows detection of product that may leak from the inside of the tank into that space, or to monitor for the potential infiltration of water from outside of the tank. These monitors respond to both fluids, and they are monitored at all times by the electronic system that I'll describe. So the tanks within the ground constructed of fiberglass have access to the surface. Most of us have seen these. We drive into a gas station, there's a series of brightly colored lids of various sizes. Those lids sit on top of these access ways, or what are sometimes referred to as sumps. The sumps, like the tanks, are also made of fiberglass reinforced plastic for the same reason. They do not corrode, they're extremely strong, and they keep what is inside, inside, and what is outside, outside. The different tank top sumps serve different functions. There are the large lids that you may see, which actually house the pumps that I'll talk about in a moment. And then there's a series of smaller lids that allow the fuel to be delivered into the tank, to collect vapors that come from the fuel during the delivery so they can be put back in the truck, and to allow for the in-tank monitoring. So the tanks themselves, as I mentioned, have real-time, continuous electronic monitoring of the level of the fuel within them, and also looking inside the tank for the potential presence of water. Water can come from bad fuel delivered. Water can come from above the tank in the event that runoff or damage to the top of the tank allows infiltration, or water could conceivably come from outside the tank. And this system, by looking both for the fuel level and the water level, monitors for any of those conditions all the time. The tanks themselves, which in this case are about 10 feet in diameter, sit within a hole in the ground, and that hole is full of what they call pea gravel or pea stone. Pea stone is rounded, fine gravel, sometimes used for driveways, for instance. And it's used in this situation because it provides a very stable surface and a very stable envelope around the tanks. That envelope is pretty scrupulously maintained. The installation instructions are very clear about how that pea gravel has to be in place. In the event that the water table is high, meaning that the level of free water within the earth, the same that would be observed in a well or something like that, is high, then the tanks are additionally supported by concrete supports. These are colloquially called deadmen. They are about a foot wide, about as long as the tank, concrete weights that sit in the bottom of the hole below the tank, and a series of fiberglass straps tie the tank down to those supports while the pea gravel's being emplaced and remains there forever after. So the tanks themselves, including their tank tops, are all fiberglass construction. And then, as I mentioned, there are large sumps on the top of the tank which contain the actual pumps. We often think of the dispensers where you go and you get your fuel as the pump, but there's actually no pump in there. The pump is back at the tank and housed within the largest sump. And from that pump to the dispenser that the fuel has to be carried, the current state of the art is a flexible reinforced pipe. Now this is a polymer pipe. It has multiple layers to it, both for integrity and protection, and also to allow the dissipation of any static electricity and to provide continuity through the system for the monitoring system. So there's essentially a plastic pipe with a foil wrap, with another plastic pipe, with another foil wrap, with another plastic pipe, with a space, and then a final plastic pipe. The double wall of the pipe, like the double walls on the tank, are there to prevent release of petroleum. They also increase the strength of the pipe. And oftentimes, although I do not recall in this particular installation, those are also installed through yet another plastic pipe, which would allow for replacement or upgrade without having to dig up the site. So these plastic pipes are connected to the pumps that sit on top of the tanks, and those pumps push the product to the dispenser units so that it can be placed in the cars. Now at the dispenser units, underneath the, again, what we normally call the pumps, as far as the customers would see, there's an
those terms
additional
are
set
fine
of
with us.
containment.
Thank you.
Yes? Okay, sorry. There's an additional set of containment called a pan or dispenser pan. This pan provides a location to bring the piping in under the dispenser and then make the connection to the dispenser, and allows for additional containment during things like changing a filter or servicing a dispenser, or if there was an issue at a dispenser so that product can't simply get into the ground. So the tanks themselves are monitored, their interstitial space is monitored. The sumps themselves have monitors, again, looking for any presence of liquid. And the dispenser pans underneath the dispensers look for the presence of liquid. Along with these detectors that are looking for any release of liquid, you also have two other primary methods that are monitoring the system. The first is the first is that at the pump there are special valves. When you select your fuel product, you start to fuel your car, the initial flow rate is slow and then it speeds up. During that time that it is slow, these valves are measuring the pressure in the pipe to confirm that the expected pressure is there and that there's not a leak somewhere between the top of the tank at the pump and the dispenser. If any loss of pressure is detected, the valve closes and you can't dispense fuel. The final way that the sort of situation at the UST system in total is monitored is the automatic tank gauge system. Again, sometimes colloquially called the Vita route, the same way tissues are called Kleenex. This is a computer that sits within the station, and it is connected to the inventory meters within the tanks that are looking for the product level in the water. It's connected to the interstitial monitors between the walls of the tanks looking for liquid, and it's connected to the monitors that are within the tank top sumps and the dispensers. And so if any of those detectors, or if a discrepancy in inventory is recorded, an alarm goes off, a light flashes, a buzzer sounds, and a report is automatically printed out and sent to the and also sent to the monitoring system that the company has. This results in action being taken, either services stopped or a repair company is dispatched to the site to investigate what's going on, or whatever that application needs to be. The rest of the system and this is not described in the letter per se, but has, as Tom alluded to, sort of been mentioned in comments and stuff. The underground part of the system is contained in the letter. Additionally, above ground, you have a couple of other items to keep in mind when it comes to potential releases and release response and that sort of thing. The first would be potential air emissions. So gasoline obviously is volatile. You can smell it when it's spilled. And because of that, both the federal government and the state government have permitting and construction requirements around that. The two most important of those with regard to gas stations are called stage 1 and stage 2 vapor recovery. Now, stage 1 is the potential emission of chemicals when the tanker truck delivers fuel to the station. So the tankers, which we've all seen on the roads presumably, pull into the station and they connect a hose and they deliver fuel into the tank. Now the delivery of that fuel moves the vapors that have accumulated above the fuel within the tank. And so what the stage 1 system does is it basically adds a second hose. That second hose is empty and it connects to a separate port on the tank. And as the fuel goes into the tank and it fills it and the vapors are displaced, the vapors go back into the truck. And then when the truck returns to the terminal to refill for more deliveries, those vapors are actually recovered by the terminal and either returned to storage or treated. The second aspect, stage 2, has actually been outlawed. And the reason it's been outlawed is because after 30 or so years of use, EPA recognized that it was no longer necessary. And the reason it was no longer necessary is what stage 2 would do was it would return vapors from your automobile tank to the tank at the station while you were filling your car, for the same reason that the truck filling the tank, it displaced vapors and those had to be recovered. Many years ago, cars started to change, and what has now been done and what is now what EPA considers in widespread use is called onboard vapor recovery. So the top of your gasoline tank in your car literally has a filter, and that filter allows to, while the tank is being filled, it collects those vapors. And then when you start your car back up, it pulls the vapors back into the car's fueling system and burns them and propels you down the road. The use of the onboard vapor recovery somewhat interfered with stage 2, which was a pipe that ran from the dispenser back to the tank. So that has been done away with. Those are no longer used at stations per Massachusetts law. Now I know that there were a couple other questions about air emissions and such, but I'll stop there if that's good. And if anybody has specific questions, as Tom said, feel free to ask, I guess, now or later.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. You mentioned that the onboard recovery is kind of standard now. Do you have any kind of, just for my edification, maybe others, what model, what years roughly moving forward those have kind of been in place? Obviously different
80s.
Since the 80s. Okay.
Since
so we're talking,
yeah.
Okay.
It was in fact, not to get sideways, but it was a long-term. EPA's regulation originally said when onboard vapor recovery is in, quote, widespread use, we will get rid of stage 2. And that took 20 years of the state saying, everybody has it now. Please make us stop doing this before EPA relented.
Understood. Thank you. I think you covered a great deal of ground regarding the engineering of the tanks and the vapor recovery systems. So, other than the vapor recovery into the truck, is vapor release done directly from the tank into the air at that location?
Not in an uncontrolled way. What is currently required by Massachusetts regulation is a California Air Resources Board approved system. And so what this means is that California sets your standard for clean air. That affects the setup and the allowable makes and models of the vapor recovery equipment for during the delivery. When delivery is not occurring, the tank has a series of vents, or each chamber has a vent. Now, those vents are not just free to atmosphere. They have a control valve on them, a pressure vacuum valve. The goal is to never place the tank under vacuum or to overpressurize the tank. So to allow for, one, the application of vacuum as the customers fuel their cars, and two, to allow for changes in temperature, which New England less of a deal than, say, Southern Florida. There are valves at the top of the vent, and so those valves will they will release into the tank. I think it's above 10 psi, or out of the tank above no more than 6 psi. The intent of those, though, is that they are closed. I mean, they remain closed at all times unless there is a condition, for instance, the morning rush and every car in town is fueling up and buying our delicious coffee. That during that period, as the level of the products being drawn down, we need makeup air in order to, not put the tank under vacuum. And so these valves allow atmospheric air into the tank. And then again, during refueling, the valves aren't involved. It's all between the truck and the tank. And then if for some reason pressure in the tank grew to a point that was not acceptable, then the valve could release and allow vapor out. But normally closed during deliveries, meant to open to allow fueling by the customers, not open to the air. And Massachusetts has decided that those valves in place of the correct, again, make and manufacturer, annually inspected, visually inspected every 7 days, along with the rest of the system, is protective, of the atmosphere under Massachusetts requirements to provide clean air under the Clean Air Act. So that's been their chosen way to address that as a state in accordance with the federal requirements.
So, bringing back my high school chemistry here, I'm probably going to make a fool of myself. But so, in terms of, you discussed that when fueling happens, atmospheric air would be pushed into the tank to equalize the pressure.
Correct.
So by reverse, essentially, like if we'll just say it's a really cold morning and a whole bunch of people are getting gas, so it sucks in a whole lot of air, and then for whatever reason, because New England weather is insane, it heats up a lot during the day. That warmer temperature would cause the atmospheric air to heat up and expand and make it too pressurized, so it would release a little bit to equalize itself.
Yeah, and that's, not to be trite, but it's a little theoretical. And the main reason why is, even though we may certainly experience the New England swing of, you don't like it now, wait 5 minutes, the tanks are under 4 feet of ground. And so the temperature within the tank that causes changes in the vapor pressure is much, much less than what we experience walking around up top. But otherwise, you're exactly right. That would be the intent.
Okay.
Nate, this is Scott with the planning board.
Yes, Scott.
An automobile would see a similar scenario though, right? With the fuel tank in an automobile.
They do, and that's why they have the OVR, right? The onboard vehicle, onboard vapor recovery is open to atmosphere, right? So as you refuel, you push the vapors out, but it's basically a Brita filter is basically what it looks like.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that as a distinction, that the number of cars that are parked in and around the area.
Oh yes,
Are
way bigger thing.
Yeah, are experiencing the exact same phenomenon.
Correct. And they're experiencing it much more because, again, they're not sort of insulated by 4 feet of ground cover and
absolutely,
everything else. That's a very good
point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Are there any further questions from members of the board, specifically for Mr. Stevens, regarding kind of the tank design, vapors, etc.?
I had some questions, Tim.
Thank you, Oren.
The first question I have is, we went through a whole system on the first hearing. Is this system any different from what you presented initially, or is this a different system? Someone else presented something, and we spent a good deal of time going through it, and I was just questioning whether or not this is the same system we heard in the first hearings, or is this something different?
Nate, I'm happy to
Please,
jump in. So yeah, we had web engineering present the first time. This is the same system. Just in conversations, with Nate, we thought that he might be able to relay some of the information, in a bit better format. Not that, it's a different system. We haven't changed horses at all. It's the same system.
Okay. And Nate, you mentioned, and I caught it, I didn't get the whole sentence, but that you're relying on the California Air Resource Board system. For what purpose was that you were relying on that?
The state of Massachusetts, in its regulations, describing what is acceptable stage 1 vapor recovery equipment, references the California Air Resource Board documents. Their approved equipment is Massachusetts approved equipment.
Achieved enough California's work.
Right. But that same board also, based on cancer risk, does recommend that schools not be located closer than 300 feet to a gas station. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't do work in California.
But you're familiar with the California Air Resource Board. That's a standard that's used throughout the country, isn't it?
I believe it is. I'm only making reference to as Massachusetts air regulations reference it.
Okay, but as far as you know, that's a standard that most jurisdictions look to in terms of establishing some standard.
For the state that I'm working in, yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah, back in December, I submitted a whole bunch of questions to Paul, and I think he delivered them to Tom. I don't know that you really addressed any of those. As it relates to the area you're talking about, one of the questions I had was, there are vent pipes. I'm not talking about the pipes, the venting, and the vapor recovery systems. And now there's only really one, but there are now vent pipes that are located right next to I give up on northeast, southwest because it's all over the place. But closest to the school, there's vent pipes coming out of that service the system. It's my understanding that those vent pipes release some build up vapor within the tanks themselves. And the question that I asked is, what's the projected type by way of chemical composition in the volume of emissions from vent pipes in the vapor recovery system? Do you know?
Those are the pipes that I referred to that are equipped with the pressure vacuum valves, which are, again, meant to let atmospheric air into the tanks for makeup during fueling and to prevent against overpressuring of the tanks.
Aren't those over the pumps themselves?
No, there is only one set of vents to the system, and they are connected to the tanks, and they are equipped with pressure vacuum control valves.
Okay. And what actually what chemicals are emanated from those pipes when they emanate something?
I assume vapor phase gasoline.
Benzene?
There is benzene in gasoline, correct?
Okay. And now, can you tell us what was the emission type? What was the emissions type and volume from similar facilities in Massachusetts? What can you expect? Do you need those at all? Do you know what they are on a release basis?
No, I don't know. I mean, the state's adherence to its air quality plan do not require the measurement of VOCs from those pipes. They require that the pipes be equipped with pressure and vacuum valves. They require that you have stage 1 vapor recovery, but they do not designate a monitoring plan or program for this sort of installation that I'm aware of.
Okay. Are you aware of studies that have examined that and determined the distance which those vapors can travel, and basically being gasoline vapors or benzene vapors? Are you aware of those studies?
I assume they exist, yes.
Have you read any of those studies? Are you aware? No. Okay, there's a bunch of studies that are part of this this project and this appeal in the original filings that relate to several of those studies, and you have not read any of them. You're not aware of them.
Which studies are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Well, there are a bunch of studies that specifically look to vapor release as well as leakage and vapors from spillage. that are both, that evaluate them. And one in particular, as it relates to the vapor pipes, I believe there's several studies, and they were surprised to learn how far those can travel, and they made some recommendations as to how far distance schools and people should be residing close to those pipes, given the nature of the chemicals that are released, to the extent they're released, and they did measure them.
I guess what I would say is that I'm not aware of a Massachusetts regulation or policy that references them or that affects siting of stations.
Okay, I understand. From my perspective, I'm assuming that you're going to comply. You have to comply with all state regulations and all federal regulations. We're here to make a determination as to the best interest of our community in terms of it being especially located next to a school, next to some residents. And so a starting point for me and for I think this whole board is we're assuming you're going to comply with state regulations. However, we're here to try to determine whether or not, given compliance with those state regulations and given your proximity, especially to the school and some residents, whether or not what you're doing can harm those people. And whether or not it can, beyond what the state requires, you're obligated at the starting point to comply with the state requirements. Whether or not that's going to impact the neighborhoods and the schools.
So now, I believe Tom provided me with an FHA appraisal document and a siting guideline. Is this what you're referring to?
Well, there's two things. There's a school siting document that suggests that schools not be within 1,000 feet, I think, of a gas station. There's also, what's the other one he gave you? Oh, yeah, FHA. Basically, it's my understanding in site evaluations that they don't allow loans, FHA loans, with any house located within, I believe it's 300 feet. Is that what they said?
Yeah, I apologize. I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking if I was familiar with studies regarding air emissions from gas stations and the health effects. I did look at the documents that you sent over. The FHA appraisal document that identifies unacceptable sites as one being near an environmental hazard. It also notes that a commercial property adjacent does not per se make an unacceptable site. It does refer to a siting distance, but that FHA document is talking about above ground storage tanks and fire and blast risk from those.
No, it's not. The definition is above and below ground. So that's
no, there is reference to stationary storage tanks, but that refers per 20 CFR 51201 to above ground storage tanks.
No, the definition, if you look further, the definition includes both. But what I was referring to is there were several other articles that had previously been submitted that I believe are still part of this process. In addition to, there was another one that was there for, yeah, it was the hydrocarbon release article.
Oh, so this study was interesting. It goes to say that if only a small fraction, such as 0.1% of the dispensed fuel were released, that would be a very big problem. It then goes on to say that actual studies had looked at release rates of 0.007 to 0.01%, and notes that pollution prevention technologies have been developed to efficiently reduce the releases of unburned fuel to the environment that routinely occur during fuel storage and transfer. Those are the same prevention technologies I'm talking about this system having: the pressure vacuum relief valves on the vents, stage 1 vapor recovery, onboard vehicle vapor recovery, plus the monitoring systems, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, if you recall, that article goes on to state, and I quote, "Health effects of living near gas stations are not well understood. Adverse health impacts may be expected to be higher in metropolitan areas than in densely populated. Particularly affected are residents nearby gas stations who spend significant amount of time at home as compared to those who work because of the longer period of exposure. Similarly affected are individuals who spend time close to a gas station, i.e. close by business and in gas stations itself. A particular concern are children who, for example, live nearby, play nearby, or attend nearby schools, because children are more vulnerable to hydrocarbon exposure. That was in the article as well. So you don't have any numbers as to what exactly is the composition of what's being released from the vapor valve or the amount of it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The other question I had that I asked back in December is what is the projected number of gallons of gasoline per year to be dispensed at this proposed location? Do you know?
I do not. No, I'm not privy to that.
I see. Well, these are questions that I posed back in December. I don't know if anybody else in the organization is prepared to answer those questions. But thank you. One other question. You mentioned that they have now there's onboard vapor recovery for vehicles. Is there an age of those vehicles? You know when that started?
You said earlier it was about the 80s forward, Oren.
Yeah,
It started in the 80s.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, EPA has determined, per their own definition, that OVR is in, quote, widespread use.
Okay. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, if there's any other specific questions relative to gas tanks, et cetera, we're happy to answer, but maybe we can move along to traffic, if you'd like.
I would I don't know if any of the members of the board have questions regarding the emissions and or the tanks, and or members of the public who may be on the Zoom call as well, and try to focus our attentions on one item at a time, and that way we're not bouncing back and forth between engineering and traffic. Scott, you had something further you wanted to ask?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question. If the question maybe for Tom to think about, Mr. Reedy. Has there been any evaluation to look at other similar gas station styles that are in a similar proximity to schools? I only wonder if there's other build designs out there like it, where, you know, superintendents could talk and understand the reality of what is versus what could be and all that other type of stuff. I don't even think that was a question, because we talk about emissions and all this other stuff. And many folks don't understand the true complexity or safeguards that are in place. And I'm just curious if there has built design out there that could alleviate some of that discussion, even offline. I don't know if it's been considered or looked at or evaluated. That's kind of my question.
So maybe just for a little bit of clarity, Scott, if you don't mind, are you asking about modifications? Like, should we look at modifications to the proposed site based upon what may exist elsewhere, given station's proximity to the school? Is that?
Let me make it, I guess, a little bit more direct. The superintendent of schools has provided a few written concerns and communications. My question is there another gas station next door to a school in the state of Massachusetts where the superintendent of that school system could speak with the superintendent of Norton? Has that been evaluated, and has that connection been made so that they can have a good, solid discussion to understand the true risks and behavior over the lifetime that they're sitting next to a gas station?
So understood. I think it's a great question. No, we have not done that analysis for gas stations. At least I have not done the analysis. Gas stations proximate to schools. Nate, I mean, I don't know if you've got any anecdotal information, whether it be Massachusetts or elsewhere. And then I think, Scott, maybe the next step is, you know, I think we obviously want to be good neighbors to the schools, to the superintendent. And so we're happy to have those conversations offline so he knows what to expect. And I think it's probably twofold for him. I know the last email or the last correspondence we received from him was the first time I think I saw the gas station vapor coming up as a potential item, and I think maybe Nate may be able to speak to that, but then also operationally traffic, which I think Maureen can get into. But it's, to answer your question directly, no, it's not something I have data on, Nate, and I guess I'll turn it over to you to see if you've got any anecdotal or experiential information.
Yeah, before Nate, you jump in on that. I only raised the question just to say, I think there's some valid concerns for some of the experiences that individuals have, and it's rightfully so, but maybe if there's a colleague or a counterpart that's lived through a similar experience, has some real world actual lessons learned and knowledge sharing to have a good discussion around, I think we should connect those parties as soon as we can, because it may alleviate a lot of concern that prevents, public upbuild and whatnot. So it's just kind of my question, recommendation that be evaluated, and it may answer questions faster, so Nate, I don't want to jump in on.
No, I would just agree. I mean, I am not a superintendent. I am a parent, but I'm not, going to be able to connect to that superintendent's concerns in the way that somebody in the same situation could. I'm not aware anecdotally of a location that I can say, oh yeah, in such and such a town this happened. But that's where I'd be on that. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Nate. Are there any other members of the board who have questions? I know we do have one member of the public who has a question that they'd like to discuss.
Mr. Chair, I still have another question, if you don't mind.
Sure, let's do that last question briefly.
Well, it's two. One is to the applicant, and back in April, I asked if they would provide a list of any complement farms. I believe you have 600 stores that are located next to a school or within 1,000 feet of a school. I don't know if you had a chance to consult with your client to determine that or not. And then I asked for some specifics if that was the case. And for the same reason, I think that Scott was raising it. Certainly, I think it would be, if that's a matter of course that you do it, that's one thing. But I'd hate to see us being one of the few, one of the ones in the throughout your whole chain. This is the first time that you're going near a school. And if you haven't been able to go to the school, I'd like to know why that was, if you had problems with doing that. And the next question I have is basically to the board and to Paul. I'm not an engineer. I don't profess to be an engineer. And I had requested and I suggested, because there's only two issues that are before us now. One is safety, one is traffic. And I requested that, I think, in order to understand what's been told to us and what we need to understand, is that we have this in some way peer reviewed. I think for me, there's still the open question is you got a vapor issue that they can't even tell us what's coming out of that. And there are articles and there are people that I'm assuming can address that issue and probably give us some clarity. I don't think we need to be in that position. There's a bunch of articles that address this issue, and I don't think it's been handled directly. And I'd like to see somebody with some expertise coming in on behalf of the board to evaluate that and make everybody else. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem. I'm not here to say you can't do it. I just see articles that suggest that there could be a significant problem. I'm concerned about it, and I want to get it resolved. And I'd like to see this board secure some peer review to evaluate exactly the risks associated with the proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Oren.
Are we still asking questions about the tanks?
We are. We do have two members of the public who also have messaged me looking to ask questions. Steve, if you want to go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, we are, Steve. Thank you. If the members of the board can hold for a moment, Pat, I do have a couple of people who said they have raised their hand to me previously. Would you mind if I took their questions first?
Sure thing.
Okay. Mr. Toole, I believe you are first in line here, so I'll let you please. I know we're not in a physical public hearing, but please address questions to the chair, and we can ask the applicant to respond as appropriate.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Toole, 104 Newcomb Street. I guess what I just wanted, there are a couple of questions I have specifically around the tank. Are there ISO standards, or is there standard for designing these tanks? I'm assuming there must be a standard on designing these tanks, even though they're made customized. Are there standards for that? And has the state given us any guidance on this? Are we within the state's recommendations for these types of tanks, for these types of situations? Every design is unique. But I guess those are the two questions to start, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Toole. Tom, I think that might be a question better suited for Mr. Stevens from an engineering perspective.
Yeah, I think so. Nate, do you want to handle that?
Sure. The tanks themselves are UL listed, and that's the design qualification. As you pointed out, they're actually constructed essentially by project. They come in standard sizes, but you can get them any size you want, really. I can't speak to the second question, which was the whether or not you're within a state recommendation for a location from a zoning or use perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, may I just ask Mr. Stevens one follow-up question to that? Is it maybe just for the public, is what UL is? I know what it is because I've been in manufacturing and I know what the inspections are. Just to say UL is just saying it isn't a rubber stamp. It is a hard proven thing. So if you could just maybe, Mr. Chairman, I could ask them to explain that.
I think that's fair. Yes, I believe.
Yes. No. That's a good point. UL is Underwriters Laboratory, and they are a quasi-governmental organization that, through very rigorous testing and documentation, demonstrates the safety of devices. If you look on a power supply for your computer, it's probably UL listed, or a blower for your furnace, it's UL. I'm looking at a surge protector right now that says UL listed with its certification number. So that's the entity, and again, my understanding is it's quite a rigorous process to achieve that listing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Suzanne, you were the second person that I had in line here. If you want to ask your question, you had a question about the expulsion of gases into the air via the vents. If you want to just raise that question to me, and we can ask the applicant to respond as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Sue Lieber. I live at 16 Seminary Way, behind the property in question. One of the questions that I do have is that there was a discussion on how the vent will expel the gases depending on air temperature and pressure. Do we know, is there a study, or has there been studies where it shows on average on the East Coast in the state of Massachusetts, how often those do expel gases?
I guess the best way I can answer that is that the state has determined what the vents should be, make and model, and what pressures they should have to get to before they release in order to be protective of, not having harmful concentrations in the air. I don't know the studies that the state bases their determination on, frankly. I can say that anecdotally, these are very discrete events. I mean, a tank that vented would vent for the order of seconds and be done, and equilibrated itself and does not anymore. I would also say that, again, the intent of those valves is to prevent just free evaporation of these vapors into the air. They're meant to restrict that to the greatest degree possible while maintaining the integrity of the tank, and they tend to pull air in during fueling, not burp, as they say, at all times.
May I ask a follow-up question, please, Mr. Chairman? I'm presuming.
Yes, sorry, I muted myself briefly.
That's okay. I didn't want to jump ahead. With that being said, that it's obvious that you do not want it to burp often. I would presume that they do burp and expel the air, whether it's seconds or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been able to find any information on it. So I was presuming that you knowing that you're building and those are the recommended vents that are required to be used, is there has to be documentation somewhere that shows how often on average they do vent out.
Again, I simply can't speak to the specifics. I don't know that answer, but yes, my understanding is that such a study would exist because that's how the state selects what they're going to use.
Okay, is there any way that we could require documentation on what that is, if that's possible? Mr. Chairman, I don't know.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Lieber.
Thank you.
Tom, I'm obviously not going to ask you for I'm obviously not going to read an entire engineering spec sheet on this vapor release system. Would you be able to try to determine that question based on the system recommended in terms of general terms of expected quantity and number of releases, if that is available, based on the manufacturing specs of that? If that is available, if it's not, tell us what is provided as a closest approximation. Is that something that you would be able to pull from the designer of the system?
I mean, so I think we can ask, and I think what I heard Mr. Stevens say is it may be better to rely on, so as he had represented, we're going to comply with all state regulations. So the state, I would like to think, isn't going to say, okay, gas stations, you can go and vent however often you want, whenever you want, with as much as you want. So they would have had to look at something in order to make that determination. We're saying we are going to do that. It also sounds like, based upon functionality of the system, frequency of burping is probably based upon a whole host of factors that I don't know if you can standardize and say, this is how often it happens at this interval with this frequency. Mondays at 6 a.m., be away because there's going to be a burp. So we can, to answer your question directly, I think we can look, we can try to get something from the manufacturer, and we can try to look at the documents that the state use in determining why they think that what they have put out there.
That's perfect. Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. We can do that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Tim, this is Tim. This is
Yes,
Joe.
Joe.
Could I just so I'm clear in terms of the occurrence of this burping, is it fair to say that they would only burp when the tank becomes pressurized, and the tank would only become pressurized with a change in temperature? That is to say, it's cool in the evening, it warms up during the day, and I understand it's underground, so the effect is less dramatic than ambient temperature, but it's only going to happen when the tank contents warm up. Is that fair to say?
And only when absolutely necessary. Again, they are set at a release pressure.
Right, I'm just trying to understand the physics of it. So the temperature in the tank, the contents warm up, so there's going to be expansion.
Yes.
But that assumes a static situation, i.e. no withdrawal from the tank in terms of customers pumping.
Right, exactly.
And the only other comment that, again, there are fewer and fewer advantages of getting old, but one of the advantages are that you have some memory. And, I heard the 300 feet from a school is a concern, and I also heard 1,000 feet. That place, the Yale school, was within 1,000 feet of a gas station where Walgreens was. There was a gas pump across the street at the senior center, which prior was the center fire station, and behind that was the highway garage, and there were pumps and tanks there. So there's been proximity of tanks to the Yale School for nigh on 50 years. So this isn't a newfound phenomenon or newfound concern. I just put that out there.
Thank you, Joe. I think the next person that had raised their hand, Pat, is your question been answered at this point, or
it's actually not? It's actually not a question. It's more just an observation. I think we all need to be realistic here. That there are plenty of gas stations throughout the Commonwealth that are built next to schools, hospitals, senior communities, grocery stores, etc., that aren't causing bodily harm. The technology that exists today just doesn't allow for it. And furthermore, if we're talking about a safety issue, I just drove down Plain Street on my ride home and noticed that the solar power plant being built adjacent to the LG North School. And as a resident and parent, I'm far more concerned with the effects of a solar field than I am with a convenience store and filling station. And to Joe's point, there have been pumps close to the Yale School. So this isn't anything new. And I just need to say, I hope that the studies and concerns that one of the board members in particular keeps bringing up isn't just a stall tactic to continue saying no to the project. If you want to say no to the project, say no to the project. However, the safety, like I said, it's built, these gas stations drive all around the state of Massachusetts. You'll see them built next to plenty of schools, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. We did have one additional comment in the chat from Mr. Kemble. Since this is right next to a school, we talked a little bit about onboard vapor recovery, Mr. Stevens, but there's a significant number of school buses who are parked in the lot right next to the Yale School on a regular basis. So in terms of the vapor emitted from one of these tanks relative to a school bus, do you have any kind of comparison there in terms of the amounts? Or
in general, gasoline vapor releases from parked and idling vehicles is a much larger concern than underground storage. I would point out that even though buses, for instance, operate on diesel fuel normally and not gasoline, there are very strict state prohibitions against idling those buses, including next to the school, because of the rates of emission. Not necessarily the same compounds, again, being diesel instead of gasoline, but because of the effects to the air.
Thank you. That is all the people who had, I am aware of who were looking to speak in terms of the gas tank design and vapors and things to that nature. Tom, we did give you one piece of homework on that section in terms of the state understanding the state guidelines a little bit better and what we're actually following when we follow those. Are there any other comments regarding this portion of the project? Or otherwise, I think it would make sense to move on to, I think traffic was the next item on the mini punch list here, and I believe Maureen from McMahon is here. So I'll give a second for anybody else to raise their hand here, but otherwise, let's talk about traffic, everybody's favorite subject. Okay, Maureen, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Maureen Schlabach from McMahon Associates. What I'd like to do is just walk you through what was done in traffic in the past, just to remind everyone of what's been documented. McMahon first prepared a traffic impact study in May of 2019. We presented that study to the planning board. We got comments from the planning board. It was also peer reviewed by Vanessa and Associates Incorporated. They provided comments to us both in May and June of 2019. We conducted a supplemental study based upon those comments that was done in November. And again, that supplemental study was also peer reviewed by McManus Associates and documented in a letter December 10th of 2019. So there's already been quite a bit of back and forth on the traffic. The issues were generally resolved between us and the peer review engineer, and our methodologies, analysis, and conclusions were accepted by them. Since that time, we have gotten some comments from one member of the planning board, and we've also gotten comments from the superintendent. The comments from the member of the planning board dealt mostly with methodology, particularly the trip generation estimates, which were based upon data that's published by the Institution of Transportation Engineers. Much of that methodology has already been vetted between the peer review engineers and us. So what I'd like to do first is concentrate on the superintendent's comments, and then I'd be happy to go back and address any specifics on traffic.
I think that would be great.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start with the first comment, which was dealing with the traffic on Route 123, the number of lanes and the hours of our analysis. So the superintendent raised concerns with the fact that there was a single lane in each direction. And when you look at the proposed site itself, and you look at the volume of traffic turning in and out of our site, and the projected delay to the traffic on 123, it does not warrant left turn lanes into the site. And additionally, I'll just mention too, if we were to include those left turn lanes, we'd be taken from the shoulder area of the road, which is where your bicycle tolerant area of the road is, and it would also require utility pole relocation. But again, the bottom line is it's just not warranted based upon the volume or the delays encountered on 123 at our site driveways. There was concern about the peak hours that were used in our traffic study. We typically go out and we count a couple of hours in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon, and from that we derive the peak hour. And when we did our initial traffic study, we counted 7 to 9 a.m. We found 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. to be the peak hour. But understanding that a lot of the school activity happens between 7 and 8, there was concern that that was more of a problem. Similarly, in the afternoon, we had initially identified the peak hour as being, I believe it was 4:30 to 5:30, and there was concern about the 2 to 3 o'clock peak hour. So when we did our supplemental study in November, we did include counts from 2 o'clock on. What actually happens on this roadway is, you have your morning peak and then the traffic subsides a little, it builds again over the afternoon. So we kind of see a steady rise from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. I think the perception of the 2 o'clock being the peak hour is because what happens often when you have school traffic is that the traffic surges in a 15 to 20 minute period. And that's what people experience and remember. Whereas in your 4:30 to 5:30 hour, you have high traffic for 4 consistent 15-minute durations. But regardless, in our supplemental study, we did go back and look at the different peak hours. We looked at analysis of 7 to 8 versus 7:30 to 8:30. And what we found was that the operations at the school driveways are worse if you look at 7 to 8 instead of 7:30 to 8:30. But on the rest of the road, like the in and out of the Cumberland Farms proposed site, was not significantly different. The second comment from the superintendent, Tom really already addressed, and that was about adding some protection along the borders with the additional landscaping that's being proposed. The third comment was about the location of the entrances and exits to the proposed site. And again, we've gone out there, we've reviewed the site driveways in terms of safe stopping site distance. We found them to meet industry standards. The peer review engineer also stated that the site driveways are sufficiently removed from the school driveways to avoid conflicts and located in optimal locations. And then the last comment that was put forth to us from the superintendent was to consider a crosswalk. And so what I'd like to talk about is 2 different crosswalks. So if we're talking about crosswalks along the driveways on 123 at the proposed property, that's something that could be considered. If we're talking about a mid-block crosswalk on Route 123, that's really a different animal. 123 is under state jurisdiction to begin with. We did, in our supplemental study, we did look into a crosswalk. There's criteria that is published by the Federal Highway Administration. And there is concern that if you just put a mid-block crosswalk, you can actually make it more dangerous for pedestrians. So based upon the speeds and the lanes and at that location, it was found that a crosswalk alone would not be sufficient and that there should be a demonstrated demand of approximately 20 pedestrians per hour. So at that point, we looked at it and said a mid-block crosswalk is not warranted under existing conditions. It's something that could be looked at again in the future to see if that pedestrian volume is apparent, but it's not apparent today. So again, crosswalks on the driveways, there's something we could entertain. Mid-block crosswalks are probably not something we could make happen. Actually, even if we wanted to, we probably could not get that approved through MassDOT. So with that,
Maureen, you mentioned a 20 pedestrians per hour volume. Is that based on a peak or a total average, or is that?
Well, the reference is that there should be at least 20. So, what we've done a lot of crosswalk studies for the state. And typically, if you can demonstrate at least some of the hours have 20 pedestrians an hour, you could maybe justify the crosswalk. It's not like it has to be every hour of the day, no. But honestly, it's hard to get 20 an hour. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it doesn't happen in a lot of suburban locations.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, that's fine. That was the last comment from the superintendent. So I was really going to offer to the board that if there's any specific traffic elements that you'd like me to speak to, I'd be happy to.
Sure. I will open up to members of the board to start. Orin, I know you had submitted a few comments. Not to put you in the back seat, but I do want to give the other members of the board a chance to go to the front of the line first. So Steve, Joe, Julie, Kevin, Scott, are there any traffic-related questions you have about the project at this point? I know we did have a peer review look at the traffic study originally.
Tim, this is Julie, if you don't mind.
Please.
So I would definitely think that the crosswalks across the driveway are a great idea. I'd love to see that implemented, and I do think that there is an existing mid-block crosswalk already right near the Yell. So maybe having a conversation with the superintendent just to clarify maybe some of his questions, concerns would be in order, especially for the traffic. And the only other thing I want to note, which he didn't bring up, and I know, Paul, I think I've mentioned this in passing before, so I don't really know who this question really goes to, or maybe clarification, but with COVID, they have changed the operation of the Yell pickup and drop off. The driveway closest to the proposed project used to be for the buses, yet it's now for parent drop off. So the dynamic of the ins and outs for the school have changed. And obviously this is not a great time to look at the traffic and knowing that half the students are in, every other day. But I just want to note that for you guys to know that if that is maintained, and I don't know if it is, so this might be a question more for the superintendent than for Tom and Maureen. But I do think that dynamic, if it were to be maintained and having the parents do the drop off on the, for lack of a better term, backside of the property as opposed to the buses, you're going to see a different mix of traffic. Given what's happening with COVID, what the next school year looks like, obviously all of that is in question. But I just think that's an important thing for you guys to know as we're talking about a crosswalk, either, a crossing guard, police detail. The traffic pattern has been, shifting there due to the traffic on the roadway and trying to handle the ins and outs and having the students get to school on time. So not quite sure where that lands, to be honest, Tim, but I think it's just a note to make sure that everybody's aware of, at least at the current, stage of the project, and what might potentially happen next year or the year after as the school kind of come back into full session.
Thank you, Julie. I think go ahead, Paul.
Here, could I just, To Julie's question about the future of the pickup and drop off locations, my information's a few months old, but when you asked that previously, I reached out to the school, and but what they had said is at the time it was still up in the air about the future of the future pickup and drop off locations. But again, that's going back several months now.
Yeah, just it might be a retouch point, and I think, now that we're obviously, into the school year and seeing how it's working, I think it'd just be a good clarification point. Maybe if there's going to be a side conversation with the school department and the superintendent, it would just be a great thing for you guys to have a conversation about, because I do think for myself, just driving by there and watching what happens, kind of at peak hour, it's just something that I think everybody needs to be aware of to ensure that the safety measures are there, when you're looking at the dynamic of, instead of 10 buses leaving, there's 25 or 30 cars, especially since that driveway is adjacent to one of your driveways for the project. So,
yeah, if I have to look at my magic crystal ball, I have a feeling that the current school drop-off situation at all the schools is probably going to be in place, I'm going to guess, through June at the end of the school year, and crossing my fingers that everything's stabilized a little bit by the 21-22 school year, and hopefully things go back to quote unquote normal. But obviously nobody knows what's happening with that right now. Are there any members of the board who had questions? Or I know you had a couple. We do have one member of the public who had a comment that they wanted to raise as well. Oren, do you want to discuss your traffic-related questions? I know we did already have the peer review look at the methodologies and everything, but please go ahead.
Can I screen share with something?
You should have that ability, Paul, if you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm not sure what we're.
Let me just see if I can do. Can I do it from this end? I'm not sure.
You should be able to. Yes.
You can, Oren. If you scroll down to the bottom of the screen and you see share screen.
The green share screen in the middle.
One second, sorry. Yeah. Traffic exhibits.
Okay.
Yeah. It's my understanding that for the purposes of the calculations, you use the ITE manual 10th edition. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, again, I granted I'm not an engineer. I'm just looking at the material I was able to find. I found this online, which purports to be the trip generations for the 10th edition. Does that look like what was used?
We did use the 10th edition. I can't say for sure if your numbers match that.
Well, the only thing you used the code 853.
That's right.
And from what I understand, there's two components to that. One is the KSSF, which is square foot per thousand. And there's an additional one of fuel positions. Each fuel position is one. Now, if I looked at your calculations, the calculations provided, it was this number, actually the number is actually 4364. But this number 178 is a reflection of basically just the top number.
Right.
So you did not take account of the fuel positions, the 12 fuel positions in your calculations?
So the intent of the manual, they offer trip generation by a number of components, and then they offer information as to what has the most data behind it. So for this land use code, they show you what it is based on square footage, and they show you what it is based upon the fuel positions. The manual goes on then to state that there's more data supporting the numbers behind the square footage, and that's the preferred method. You're not intended to imply both. You're intended to imply the one that has the better set of data source.
So it's an either or, not a combination.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's true for, now you discounted also, so, okay, so in using that number, let me take it down to another screen. This was, and again, you can tell me what this represents. This is the ITE engineer's publication as errata. This is basically a correction. And this corrected, basically, we're talking about the 10th edition. Okay? And in that, it lists the AMP, but I'm just noting, this is, if you look at the schedule here, it refers to fueling stations of 6 to 8, and square footages from 2.3 square foot to 2,300 square feet to 4,200 square feet. And also, if you look at the weekday survey date, these surveys were taken in 1992, and in the PM, it was down to 1989. So that's the data we were using for this location. And also, you had referenced, it looks like, and I don't know if this is all that you use for this data, or there's different information, or this replaces what you used. But it also, this is referencing Maryland, Kentucky, Indiana.
Yeah, what the Institute of Transportation Engineers does is it collects data from all across the nation and it compiles it by land uses. So it's a great source of information. What we have found, what you're looking at right now, has to do with pass-by trips, and it's a table geared at estimating how much traffic is already on the road, as opposed to new traffic coming to the site. We have found actually that the pass-by rate is even higher than what's estimated here by the national data. I mean, the pass-by rate that we applied was 63% in the AM, 66% in the PM.
I understand that, but I'm just looking at this particular land use code. Now, on the other hand, if you look at the land use code for 960, it runs from 4,600, 46 something up to 556, something like that, and it talks about 12 pumps to 20 pumps. And again,
yeah, so we did address this in our comments back and forth with the peer review engineer. And we cited the reasons why we didn't apply the super convenience store. And some of it is right here in the data you're showing. When you look at the number of fueling positions, I don't know if you've ever been to Texas and you see a Buc-ee's. It's an amazing convenience store. I mean, there are literally 20 to 50 gas pumps. And so this whole source of data is a different kind of development than what we're talking about, what you typically see in New England for a convenience and gas station.
but this data is surveyed as of 2000. The other one was 1992, just by way of sample.
Yeah, the numbers have not changed much from year to year.
Oren, I'm not sure if it's makes sense for us to nitpick the ITE here, but I understand what you're looking to nail down and understand the trip generation itself. Maureen, just to restate, I think what you had said when we spoke with you before is you mentioned a specific rate of pass-through traffic that you were using for the study, but you felt that was a little bit conservative in terms of the pass-through traffic that would actually pass through the site. Essentially, I think the terminology that you used, that you caveated that Cumberland may not want to hear it, but if it's busy, people aren't going to do anything but pass through traffic at the site because they're not going to want to taking a left into the traffic, basically.
Right. So what you tend to see at this type of a land use is people tend to go right in, right out, or they make their lefts in and out of the site in the off-peak hours, or they avoid it and drive to a different gas station if they're going to have to turn left and then turn left out of that site as well.
Let me ask you this: in looking at this schedule, and again, these are intended to be averages, but would you think as part of these averages, they would select a location that had a level of service of F and had basically a delay in front of the location back in 24% of the time in an hour-and-a-half period? You think that would be one of the locations they would pick for this type of nationwide survey?
So the delays at the site are centered on the patrons leaving the site. But it's important to note that the volume to capacity ratio is less than 1, indicating that while the traffic leaving the site is going to wait maybe 60 seconds, they are going to find gaps in the traffic on 123 to enter the mainline stream. The 24% queue you're talking about comes from the 123 Route 140 signal, right? That we're talking about in the eastbound direction. And that is the situation that's happening throughout the village. That's happening to every driveway along 123.
I understand, but in looking at the survey, I'm assuming that the question is, would they be picking the location that's that problematic in trying to create a national standard?
Yes, they are including they're including all the data that's submitted to them, whether it's a level of service condition F or not. And again, the long delays are the people exiting the site. It's not the people turning on into the site from 123. The level of service on 123 at the site driveways is level of service A. We're not delaying the traffic on 123 at all by the movements at the site driveway.
We understand that the challenges incumbent in this area are related to the 123-140 intersection and not this specific project. I think what Oren is speaking to is the general congestion in the area and the concern that may bring. Oren, you are still sharing your screen.
That's right.
So I'm not sure if you want to. I think we've covered the IT manual fairly thoroughly.
Well, I'd like to ask a couple more questions if you don't mind. Of this list, basically, picking a use, is it reasonable to say that this is one of the most high intensive uses that's possible, that's listed under the schedule?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you asking me if it's one of the highest on this table?
In other words, there are a lot of other uses, retail uses, that aren't as focused, especially for the time period that we are really sensitive about. I don't know about anybody else, but I usually don't go for coffee on my way home from work. I usually go for coffee going to work. And I'm assuming that's true with this operation. It's focused on the morning operation and the traffic generated during the morning peak hours. And that's not true with almost any other retail use other than Dunkin' Donuts, for one. The other issue,
A donut shop would be high, a McDonald's would be high, gas station convenience store is high, but again, it's a convenience land use. People go to it when it's convenient. People do avoid it. We counted sites for Cumberland Farms on busy roads, and we've seen it drop off in the peak hour because nobody wants to turn in and turn out against the traffic. So the traffic kind of works itself out at a site like this.
well, okay, but also,
Thank you, Maureen.
if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I generated a whole bunch of questions as an accommodation to the applicant, and I really don't think I've gotten responses. I asked them in advance, I didn't get them, and I'd really like to go through them. I think there are questions that still need to be resolved. And I'm happy to get information. I'm not saying I have the answers, but certainly on their face, there are certain questions that I think are relevant to the traffic situation we have here.
Okay. Oren, in the interest in moving this along, Maureen, do you have the questions that were submitted available to you? And if there are any which were not covered in the back and forth with the peer engineer, would you be able to run through those briefly?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one quick question?
Yes, Steve.
Were there any concerns by the peer reviewer about the numbers you used to generate for the trip generations?
No, we did have comments and responses back and forth. In the end, they accepted our methodology and said we met the professional standards for this traffic analysis.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that was clear. So the actual peer reviewer for traffic did not have an issue. Okay, that was my question.
Thank you, Steve. Maureen,
Mr.
do you
Chairman,
have
just a
that
quick
file?
follow-up to that. Sorry.
Sure, Scott, go ahead.
Only for clarity, this is Scott. A question and a derived answer there that were different. One was they agree with it, and one that they agreed that they used charts. Just, I want to make sure that that discussion was clean.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything.
Steve, if you don't mind asking your question again, I mean, you asked if the reviewer had any questions with the numbers that were used, and then you derived an answer saying he had no issues with it. I just want to make sure like the numbers versus the conclusion are two different pieces. I want to make sure we're clear.
Thank you, Scott. Not the overall conclusion. I'm just saying with the numbers used, because that seems to have taken up quite a bit of time tonight, and I just want to make sure that if there was a major problem, that the peer reviewer would have brought that up as far as the numbers go for the trip generations.
Yeah, so there were comments and responses on the trip generation, and those were resolved and accepted by the peer review.
Okay.
Maureen,
thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Just for clarity.
Lauren, in terms of your comments, are there any of these comments which you do not feel would have been adequately addressed by the engineering peer review or the traffic engineering peer review that was done in regards to this project?
Well, yeah, my issue is, as I reported and I indicated to the applicant, I had asked if my concern was basically, rather than relying on IT standards, I was curious as to what their experience was on the ground relative to this operation. And as a result, they said they weren't providing it, or they refused to or didn't provide it. I did a traffic count at their existing locations. And I reported that, and basically it indicated significantly above what the standards was, and significantly above what they're projecting for the site. And that was the basis for a major concern in what I was looking at. And that's what I'd like to see it getting addressed. We don't have that information as to what is relative to this location and to the actual operations. The other thing that I've got on this screen that I hadn't raised, that was raised in the original proceeding, but in as much as the superintendent raised concerns about the high school, I thought this was relevant. Because right now, according to this, there's, under the existing conditions, there's a delay in front of the high school driveway of 557 seconds, which is anything over 50 seconds is considered failure. Is that correct?
It depends if you're talking about a signalized or unsignalized intersection.
These are unsignalized. This is an unsignalized intersection, I'm assuming, in front of the high school. Is that correct?
Yes, but again, it's delays and it's volume over capacity ratios that we deal with.
And basically, you did a survey about the queuing, which means how much was the traffic backed up from the signal at Mansfield Avenue back, and you were saying from, I think it was an hour and a half period from 7 to 8:30, traffic was backed up past the Cumberland Farms site 24% of the time. That's under existing conditions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then you suggested in a no-build situation, which is without Cumberland Farms, for the year 2025, that was going to be increased to 810 seconds, which is basically another 5 minutes over what they have.
I'm not sure where you're taking these numbers from.
So,
difficult for me to say.
Lauren, is it safe for me to summarize that you feel that the area itself is filled with traffic congestion, and you feel that will only get worse in the next 3 or 4 years, even if there is no project here? So you are concerned about adding any more "quote unquote" straws on top of the camel's back?
I'm concerned about adding another 74 seconds on top of that. Again, assuming those numbers are correct. And now, I'm assuming at that point, instead of backing up, at that point, backing up just to the extent of the Cumberland site, you're going to back up even further, covering the Ellen School and maybe even the high school driveway. And I just think that
traffic operations are not showing that in the projections. And isn't the town considering improvements at 123 and 140? Isn't that part of the village plan?
It is, but it is not something that we can use in any kind of a numerical way to discuss what the traffic might be like at this stage.
No, I appreciate that. I just bring it up in terms of if we're going to say, 5 years from now, it's going to be this much worse. Well, 5 years from now, there could be a solution at 123 and 140.
We can't know that one way or another.
What I'm suggesting, is basically, granted, when you have a failing condition, we're not going to shut off any development on that street. We can't. I'm just saying to select what I would suggest is one of the highest focuses of trip generation and generation of traffic in that area, as opposed to any other retail use, is something that this board needs to consider very seriously.
Yeah, and I would add too that a lot of that traffic is pass-by traffic. It's traffic that's already on 123.
So when you say that, so if the traffic is backed up past Cumberland Farms, now you're going to have traffic going in and out of that lane that's backed up, going in the same direction or cutting back and forth.
I'm saying the majority of the traffic going in and out of the site is already on 123. We're not drawing a lot of new trips to 123 with this land use.
I understand, but you have traffic now that's backed up in front of it, and you have cars coming in and trying to get in and out, and there will be cars trying to make a left-hand turn, crossing that traffic.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a point of order? As a public chair, I mean, it seems like we keep going this rapid question. Can we maybe open up for more discussion questions? It seems that the questions are almost combative in a way.
I won't say that. I think, I think you have made your point about adding more things in that area, particularly from a quote unquote high vehicle trip generator source, is something that the board needs to consider as part of our overall process. I think that I applaud your effort in doing a traffic count and looking at from a ground level. I think from a standards-based perspective, we have to go with what the engineering standards are and what our peer reviewers said. So I don't want to belabor this point anymore. I think we did have one, I'm not sure if other members of the board have comments. We did have one member of the public who wanted to raise a comment earlier in this in terms of traffic, going back to the crosswalk issue. Are there any other members of the board who wanted to ask anything related to traffic, which has not been covered already? Otherwise, I would look to Mr. Kimball to ask his question about the existing crosswalk in proximity to the site. I know some of it falls under the state and all of that perspective, but not hearing anybody from a member of the board, and I think I've rambled long enough. So, Mr. Kimball, if you want to go ahead. Yes, I believe we can hear you. It's pretty soft, Bob. No, okay. I'll just go back to what you had typed into the chat. If you can get the mic turned on, and then I'll let you take over here. But your point in the chat was that because there is already an approved crosswalk on 123 in relative proximity to the school, whether it would be feasible to update the light at that crosswalk to a more substantial version, such as what is further down 123, closer to Wheaton College. I'm not sure, Maureen, if you're aware of that traffic crosswalk intersection.
So I believe it's a rectangular rapid flashing beacon that's there. Does that sound right? So when you go to cross, it begins to flash and it lets
Press
the
a button,
motorist.
it flashes. Yeah.
Right. That, yes, I am aware of those crosswalks. I think I might turn it back to Tom on that if that's something we can consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Just to kind of put it back into context of how we got here, and really what those next steps are.
Bob, I think that was you. So if you want to mute yourself, please.
How's that? Okay.
That's good.
So, just to, again, put it into context of how we got here. So, I mean, we're under appeal. So I think there's kind of a fundamental disagreement with the board based on its previous decision from last year. We've made what we consider some pretty significant changes to the plan to address what the board's concerns are. As candid as I can be, if it continues where we're just going to go through the same motions and it's going to be April and we're not going to get anywhere, I'm hesitant to say, yes, that's something we can do. So I've heard a couple of things tonight, and I'll step back and say, obviously, we would love for you to approve this evening. I don't know that that's going to happen based upon some of the other things that I'm hearing. We haven't heard from the balance of the public yet. I know I've been asked to get some documentation, whether that becomes a condition of approval, understanding that, we do have to comply with all state standards, and what we're probably going to be providing you are the state standards. So if it gets closed tonight, in the interim, as everybody else is talking, I can get in touch with Cumberland Farms to see if they would be willing to upgrade that mid-block crosswalk. But I'm frankly just trying to get a read from the board of where does everybody sit on this. I mean, you've had it for quite some time. We have presented, some of the same information that you've had presented before. So, I mean, I'll leave it at that. And I'll ask, but I can't make any promises.
Understood, Mr. Reedy. Thank you.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Bob, we can hear you.
Campbell, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I'm on my phone now, so this technology is getting beyond me. Just want to make a couple of comments about that crosswalk. I was involved in the town for over 30 years, and that crosswalk has been there before my time. That was approved by the state many, many years ago, and I don't understand why we can't ask the applicant to upgrade that for us in the same form or manner that we have in front of Wheaton College, which is a pretty good crosswalk system. I've been listening to your meeting, and we recently did the Village Center core updates with the mixed use coming up in the next few years. We are talking about traffic lights. There has been some discussion about, the applicant hires a traffic engineer to do the work, which they've done. We then, the planning board, asked the applicant to fund a peer review, which they've done, and they both agree that this is the best they can do as far as the traffic situation goes. So we've done what we have to do, but I think one of the biggest hang-ups seems to be that getting people, kids across the street from the school to the other side. And I think working with the state on a pre-existing right should be the easiest solution for some of the issues. The other part of that traffic system would be that when they hit the button to cross the street, it stops traffic in both directions. So if you've got some traffic being stopped and going back and forth, whatever during the day, it's gonna have some impact on how the traffic flows through there. So I just think it's a normal thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And I think we need to listen to our professionals and do what they tell us we should do. We can argue all day long about traffic, but this new core village we just put together is going to create a lot more traffic than this one gas station is going to create. So I would encourage the board to move ahead with this and get this going. Norton has a reputation of we've always been business friendly, And I got to tell you, as a prior member of the Board of Selectmen for 24 years, I'm at a point now where I'm almost embarrassed by what you guys are having to go through to approve this. So I would encourage you to take a hard look at this and try to get this project done so we can move on to other more important projects for the town and for the future. So I thank you for giving me time to say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make any further comments?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Wiggins, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, Peter J. Wiggins. Then I use that road lots of. I go by that area lots of times, and it's very busy. Come morning time and the afternoon time, the traffic flow around 123 is busy a lot, and it can get busy. It can get busy. So it's time that we move ahead with this project because Norton is business friendly. So we need to move on with this project and focus on other projects. And this is a photo in the Sun Chronicle from January 1973. This is what the crosswalk looked like back in 1973. Look at the traffic light. Wow.
It's going 48 years, I think, Peter. So
wow.
I could do math today. So thank you. Okay. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make a comment at this point in time?
Chairman?
Mr. Toole, yes, sorry.
Can you hear me? This is Robert Charette, Norton residents. If okay, I'd like to make a quick comment. I'll be brief.
Sure. Can you please state your address for the record as well?
Sure. 6 Fuller Drive in Norton. Previous address is 215 Bay Road in Norton.
Thank you.
Chairman, been a member or part of this town for over 2 decades now, and for several years, this vacant parcel has been an eyesore for this town, which happens to be located on our main thoroughfare. The town is now being offered the opportunity to procure some much-needed tax revenue from a reputable company who's willing and able to establish a footprint on this location. And I'm not exactly certain why we're looking this gift horse in the mouth. This is a safe project. This has been a well-researched project, a much debated project, and this is a viable project for this town in that area. I just ask that the town would consider passing this Cumberland Farms project and allow this this project to continue and to proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charette. Mr. Toole, I think you had a comment that you wanted to make as well.
I do, and I think it's kind of on top of Mr. Charette's comments. You know, I wanted to thank the planning board. I know I've been critical at times, specifically around this project, and your job is to exhaust all the options to make sure it's safe and viable for the town. And I think we've done that. It's been to a court and they've thrown it back for a solution, as well as the town has said in the town meeting that they want this project. And I think I really would encourage you to this project and tonight's vote is very important about future business in this town. As a member of the Economic Development Commission, as well as the Select Board, growing our business base is very, very important. And I think it's besides safety, obviously, but I think we've done everything we can with the public officials and the peer reviews. And I would encourage this board to vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Toole. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment? I do see somebody else speaking in the chat. If they would like to raise their hand or unmute to make any further comments at this point, please speak up or do so.
Hi, this is Sue Lieber, again, 16 Seminary Way. I would just like to say I'm all for business. It's depending on what that footprint is going to leave behind. While it might be a great business footprint, what happens when they leave and are no longer there, and what does that do to the town?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lieber. Is Is there anybody else who would like to make any further comments? I see one message in the chat. I'm not sure if that person wants to, and they're basically echoing what Ms. Lieber had said. Is there anything else from members of the public at this point regarding the project or any of the, yes, who, Ms. Stern?
Stern, 13 Fuller Drive. I had put a question in the chat before, and it was in regards to Mr. Siegel's report on the tanks. I was wondering if that report was valid for the tanks that are actually being put in now, or is this a report from long ago from older gas stations and older tanks? And secondly, it's my understanding from watching this and going through all of this that there have already been 2 traffic reports. So I don't understand why that is even a discussion tonight.
Sure. I'll try to answer that. I think that the reports that were referenced, they should be available. Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they are available for your reading in the public-facing folder for this meeting. If you'd like to review the original data yourself. I'm not going to try to summarize an environmental study because I'm certainly not qualified for it. In terms of the traffic study, you mentioned there were 2. As I think Mr. Kimball kind of described with this kind of a project, the applicant did a traffic study, and then because we are not traffic engineers, the applicant pays for a peer review engineer, so another traffic engineer to double check their work from the town's perspective. So that is, quote unquote, the town's expert opinion reviewing that first report. So that's the difference in the 2 reports. One is the initial report from the applicant, and the other one is the peer review, making sure that the engineering all made sense. And for lack of a better analogy, that everybody's 2 + 2 still equals 4. So does that answer your question, Ms. Stern?
I think so. I think what I was just asking is if we've had 2 reports, why are we still thinking that traffic is going to be a problem if 2 reports showed that it wasn't going to be?
Thank you very much. I think everybody is entitled to their own feelings about the project and about the area and how traffic will be impacted. I think there's a level of frustration with traffic in the area that touches everybody in Norton in one way or another. So I won't speak to anybody's frame of mind or feelings. I know I have to rely on the peer reviewer from my perspective. But I also am stuck studying that traffic on my own. So are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment on the meeting? I see a couple other things in the chat, but I won't call those people out in case they would prefer to remain silent.
Hi, my name is George Abatidis, 207 Bay Road.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? And everything we've asked of Cumberland Farms, I think they've done it. If you look around the state, they do a great job with their properties, keeping it clean and stuff. They do a great job of just, dragging business in. And I think it's time to put this thing in and instead of keep on dragging it down the road. How long will something like this take? Sometimes we overdo it and overthink things. When they've done everything we've asked and they just do a great job everywhere you look around the state.
Thank you, Mr. Arventidis. I apologize if I just mispronounced your last name.
Great job, thanks.
And Ms. Cohen, I believe you were also looking to speak.
Yes, thank you. I just want to echo, and first I actually just want to say that I am not related to the developer. I think that's important to note, even though we have the same last name. I think I just want to comment on how I agree with some of the other people that have spoken tonight. I feel like this project has been in front of you guys for years now. I went to meetings early on when it was a very different board. I think that, this group has, jumped through hoops. Whatever has been asked of them, they have done. I think it's time to start listening to, the townspeople at town meeting, what they had to say. Your studies have been done, And this town desperately needs business. And here is somebody who lives in town who wants to invest in their community. I think it's time that we need to start, helping grow the business in this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. I haven't seen anybody else raise their hand in the chat, but if there is anybody else who would like to make a comment, they certainly can. I'll also throw it back to members of the board if there are any further questions that they have based on what has been raised by members of the public.
Tim, this is Julie. I just have 2 quick questions when the time comes, but I'll let the public remain at the forefront for the next couple of minutes.
Thank you, Julie. I'm not sure if anybody else is going to speak up at this point, so I think, Julie, the floor would be yours.
Thanks. I just, Tom, can you just go over the fencing again? I know that was another thing that the superintendent mentioned on, and then I just wanted to touch upon hours of operation again. So if you could just address those 2 for me, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, you're sharing your screen. Thank you.
Yeah, here I am again. Sure. So fencing, we've got, and I think we had originally fencing along this property line, which obviously the school driveway is right here. What we did was essentially backfilled and add significant amount of tree planting and shrubs all in here. I mean, there was a few, I think, but I think we went through and really enhanced that. And then in the back, we still have that 7-foot high white vinyl classic clay stockade fence that runs along the property to here and then comes down to here. And maybe, John, do you know, this is for John Mershan, the engineer, is it 7 foot all the way around? And then I thought it might have tapered down at this area just for sight lines was my recollection, but I just want to have the engineer double check me on that. If you could.
This is John Mershan from Farland. That's correct. It's 7 feet along that property line as well.
Okay. So 7 feet all the way around.
Yep, and
and I thought it started to taper right here for sight lines.
Yeah, that would make sense if you guys are tapering it down.
Yep. And then I believe the proposal was 24 hours of operation.
That was in the proposal, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So unless, I think before we kind of round out questioning on this point, Amy, I know we've had you on the line here for a period of time, but just to restate the timeline involved in the process regarding the remand in terms of what updates need to be filed next, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page regarding that, as well as the timeline we agreed to as part of the remand. Correct?
So the timeline that you agreed to was to commence the hearing, which you've met that deadline, and then we have a status conference. A status report due to the court on February 1st, which we could either, if the board decides to take a vote tonight, we would report that. We would report what the vote is, or if the board was going to continue, we would simply just state that the remand was being continued. So there's really nothing that that this board has to worry about with regard to the court action at this time. We have time.
Yeah, but in terms of obviously there is a status update in a little less than 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. So I think we have, I know speaking for myself personally, I do not have any further questions for the applicant. I'm not sure if any other members of the board do. I know we had talked about some paperwork and that it might be a good idea to have a discussion with the superintendent at some level about the project and about specifically in regards to some of the concerns they had raised, perhaps offline. But do any other members of the board have any further questions?
Yeah,
Or
Mr.
do
Chairman.
they have actions that they would like us to take on the proposal at this time? Scott, yes?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Scott. I think I'll start the cadence here. Technology-wise, I believe in the strength of the design and everything else. I think this is a great project. I respect the position of the superintendent and understand some of the concerns that he's raised, and I think that they are very easily appeasable. I just think that that needs to be had first, just so that we make sure that, you know, the strength of his position and everything he's watching out for, that we check and make sure all of those are good. I think we're going to get to a clean position there, you know, and I guess just for awareness, you know, I'm in favor of the project, and I'd like to see some of those items quickly remedied so that we can get that clarity and move forward. So just some input for the public and the rest of the board on my position.
Thank you, Scott, for your comments. Joe, I saw your name flashing up there. Were you looking to speak next?
I just want my memory refreshed from a technical standpoint. I believe we had either 3 or 4 votes. I believe the site plan was approved, and at least one of the special permits was approved. And I guess what I want to know is what needs to be voted on to make this project go forward.
Thank you, Joe. Paul or Amy, do you want to handle that from a what needs to be voted on and what has already been approved perspective?
Sure. So the special permit for, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Amy Questle, Town Council. The special permit for a gas station in Village Commercial was not approved. It was denied for failure to reach the supermajority vote. And that had 3 no votes. The special permit for the electric message center in the Village Commercial, that was also denied based on 3 no votes. The special permit, which is the impervious surface in the Water Resource Protection District, that was approved unanimously. And then the special permit for the gas station in Zone 3 of the Water Resource Protection District was approved by supermajority. So those are the special permits. So that it's the first 2, the special permit for the use and then the electric sign. So it is what Attorney Reedy applied for in the remand.
Thank you. Joe, does that answer your question?
It does, and let me just make a couple of comments, and then I'm not sure exactly what I want to do after that, but yeah, I was in favor of the project initially. Frankly, I'm more in favor of the project now, based on some of the things that I've heard. You know, Oren has raised considerable concern around the issue of health and off-gassing. I think what I heard today makes me a little more comfortable. And again, this is an amateur trying to understand physics, but it would seem to me that the off-venting of that vent pipe as a result of pressurization in a busy gas station would rarely ever happen. And I would have to think there's some type of modeling that could be done, but I don't want to prolong this any longer. Some modeling that could be done based on temperature change versus gas expansion, offset by just pumping of gas, that could easily predict whether in fact there'd be pressure built up such that it'd be venting. But to be candid, I'm ready to act on this now, notwithstanding Superintendent Kayada's concerns and comments. One of the concerns I have with his concern is I'd like to know how many walkers there are and where they're coming from such that Cumberland Farms in any way impacts them. But I think that's a little information too late. I'm prepared, and in fact I will, move to approve the special permit for the Cumberland Farms as applied for in the Village Commercial District.
I'll second that. This is Steve.
So, Joe, just to confirm, you're doing this for the use, for the electronic message center, or both?
No, just for the use.
For the use itself, not for the electronic message center in this motion.
Right.
Okay. And Steve, your second stands?
Correct.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor and a second. Are there any other, actually, we would need to close the hearing before we voted to approve those, is that, I believe. So let's
So I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
If I may, maybe I can get town council involved here. I've been involved in plenty of other hearings where the public hearing can stay open during deliberation. It doesn't necessarily need to stop. And I'm just concerned that, so there's a motion on the table, there's been a second. If for some reason, I don't want to end up back in court, frankly. So if it looks like that's going sideways, to recover that, if you close your public hearing and then we're continued to another time, you have to re-advertise, et cetera. So I would obviously defer to town council to give you the advice, but I know that I've been involved in plenty where the public hearing stays open during deliberation and vote. But
Yeah, I would agree. It's not a requirement that the hearing be closed. If the board does not want to take any further information, then close the hearing, but you can keep it open. It's your option.
I'll withdraw my
Thank
motion
you.
to close then.
Okay, so we have an open motion on the table to approve the use in this location from Joe with a second from Steve. Is there any further discussion on this motion itself? Oren, I see your hand.
Is it possible to ask the applicant a question at this point? I was just wanting to do something, get a sense of what they're willing to do relative to, I don't know, I don't want to start to ask the question. My concern was, they mentioned the 2 weeks for a police, having police at a location. And I don't know I'm not sure myself what we now have for police there and what kind of service we have. And my question was, if in fact after that 2 weeks or any time thereafter, there's a problem related to this site, whether they'd be willing to fund the cost of a detail if it's necessary. If the police decide that it's necessary and relates to either what's happening at the school, I'm not sure how that would work. But I'm trying to see if there's a way of wrestling around what I have as concern with traffic. And they're saying 2 weeks. I don't know what that does to anybody, whether or not any way of extending that out.
Or I think that is something that we would look to condition in the decision if that was something that we wanted to make sure was included.
I just didn't know what they had in mind for it and whether that's something they'd be open to if hearing is open.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can condition. They've obviously supported a specific length of time, and we can act on that or suggest otherwise at our discretion.
Chair, can I just ask clarification on the motion and to approve the special permit for use? Is that going to be subject to conditions?
Yes, that's I don't know that you want me to make that a formal part of the motion, but that's frankly understood. But
Thank you, Joe. We can add that to the motion. Steve, does your second still stand?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Kevin O'Neill. I know we talked a lot about the superintendent's concerns, and most of that communication that we've seen through email was just over the past few days, with the last correspondence being this afternoon. And I wish he was on this call right now, because that's the only concern I have remaining at this point, is the superintendent's concerns. And out of respect for him, I know we have a couple of proposals on the table from the applicant. We had a couple good ideas, from members of the board, to the superintendent to research some of his peers, perhaps. We also have a mention from a member of the board as far as the parents' drop-off plans going forward. So with those discussions, I really wish we had a response on that, because that's my only concern at this point. And I know he voiced his concerns via email. We do have a couple of members of the school committee on this call. If they would be willing to speak on behalf of the school department and allow us to move forward with the vote, that's what I would request at this time.
So your position on the motion is that you would prefer, you think that it's slightly premature at this point? Is that?
Well, we had a lot of discussions around engaging the superintendent and asking him if the proposals were fine. Now, we could always approve this under the conditions that the proposals, to the superintendent, he was amicable to those proposals. But given that we have two members of the school committee on this call, maybe I'd like them to speak on behalf of the school department, if they see any concerns with this project going forward based on what we discussed tonight.
I think we would want a clear action on the motion at this point, prior to that, rather than going into an entirely different line of questioning.
So if I could, Mr. Chair, just to address the superintendent's comments, we're obviously happy to have a conversation with him, whether it's a condition of an approval, which is obviously the hopeful outcome. My concern, frankly, is, his first line is his disagreement with the traffic analysis. And I think, we vetted that pretty well, not only through Maureen, but also the peer reviewer. So I don't know that you get anywhere with him on that. And so just as I'm having this conversation, either as a condition or otherwise, I just want to, set a realistic expectation for the board of what he comes back with. I think we've talked about the crossing guard, obviously, as a concession. We've talked about the police detail as a concession. I think we could certainly consider that pedestrian improvement to the signal as a condition if it gets us across the finish line tonight. But I understand. I'm going to say, oh, okay, you're all of a sudden right, when he said, I'm not sure about it. Granted, we haven't had the conversation with him, and I understand there's plenty of things happening behind the scenes relative to being a superintendent in a COVID world. So, we want to be respectful of the board and him. So that's just, as we're thinking about his comments, something that comes to mind.
Thank you. Joe, given Kevin's comments, do you think you would want to hear from the members of the school committee prior to action on your motion, or do you think you would like to move forward?
I'm fine if those members of the school committee that are in attendance tonight are prepared to speak to this, that's fine. But I would like to move the question ultimately tonight.
Thank you, Joe. Are either of those members willing to speak to that effect, or is it kind of putting you a little bit too much on the spot here? If that's okay, and if that's how you feel, that's fine.
I can start and speak to this. I first want to start off by saying that.
Can you just restate your name and address for the record? I'm sorry.
Terry Cowan, 48 Harvey Street, member of school committee. I guess I wish if I knew, and I think that if Dr. Bayetta knew how much his name was going to be mentioned tonight, he would have wanted to have been here as well. Because I know he did share an email with us about his response to Paul earlier. Again, we are under some, all of this COVID stuff, and it's extremely stressful right now for everybody in the schools. I certainly can't speak for Dr. Baeta, so he's a reasonable man. Me personally, I'm for this project as a townsperson, but again, we don't vote on these kinds of things. We have discussions and we have opinions, but Kathleen, if you have anything else to add, it really hasn't been, we haven't really talked about it much, to be honest.
I would agree with Sherry. I mean, we can't speak for him, but what I read from that was that he had these concerns that he had never gotten answers on. I myself, after hearing about the tanks and how they work, I obviously feel much better about them. But again, we don't, as a board, we generally, I think we've done one thing in the 6 or 7 years I've been on where we voted for something that wasn't school related. It's not, like Sherry said, not something we normally discuss. From his letter, I think he was just looking for answers that he didn't feel he had the answers to yet. And as Sherry said, reasonable and with concessions. I mean, I would say to vote this through tonight as you vote, and just keep in mind that, maybe a conversation with him is something that can happen.
And I would also be willing, and I'm sure Kathleen would be as well, to have a conversation with Dr. Baeta tomorrow to let him know all that we heard about in this meeting tonight and how we both felt comfortable with a favorable vote for tonight.
Yeah, and I do feel like if he had known how much he would be a part of this, he
Absolutely.
100% would have been here.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you both. Kevin, does that speak to, I think, your train of thought?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And by no means did I was I implying that I wanted Mrs. Cohen and Mrs. Stern to make the vote for us. Basically, what I was kind of getting at is, would you prefer that we delay our vote until Dr. Baeta can review the material, that was pretty much the only other option. Or are you okay with us moving forward tonight?
I mean, that's a tough call. I'm fine with you moving forward tonight. I think that there need to be conversations with him, but I mean, that's a tough call.
Thank you both. I think that's probably.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, they're here. They're not serving. They're not here in their
Yes.
capacity
No,
as school committee members. This is really putting them in a difficult position.
Yes.
I would say. I think they were both very clear that their opinions were as taxpayers and residents. So I think we could just go with that.
Yeah, I appreciate all that they were able to share and that they felt, and thank you again.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is Scott. Just a quick
Thank you, Scott.
elaboration in terms of if there is the option of postponing this vote to a later stage, what's that timeline? And my question would be, is that time sufficient enough to let Dr. Baeta have a response? Are we talking a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
I think that is a valid question. I think that in general, I feel that everything coming from the school department has been pretty quick. I think that the emails coming from Dr. Baeta have been fairly back and forth without taking too long between responses here. So I think that I would expect a relatively straightforward and I'm not going to say quick response, but I can't. Yeah.
Maybe a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. I believe the next planning board meeting is on the 2nd of February. I believe that we can probably communicate to him, and Mr. Reedy will also be cognizant of some of the interests that Mr. Bayetta has and concerns, and that, you know, that 2-week time window may be enough to alleviate all the concerns. We can get Dr. Bayetta on the call with us and finalize some of those items and make a motion at that point in time, you know?
Okay.
Just a question.
So
you know, two weeks, I mean, just opening that up to people's thought here in terms of the board.
So speaking to the motion, you would look to continue this to the next planning board
First, I think we
meeting
need the motion to be
and then
withdrawn.
close it.
Yeah, the motion first would need to be withdrawn, but I would try and interject the suggestion that, you know, we look at in his position with all the comments that have been had, the intent of both the applicant, the understanding that some people have expressed with where this can go with Dr. Bayetta, and we revisit it then with a pretty hard discussion.
Okay.
But the motion is on the floor, I believe, still. So
the motion is still on the floor. Joe, are you still looking to move the question this evening, or is there any further discussion on the motion itself?
Yeah, let me, and I don't have Dr. Bayetta's email in front of me, but as I recall, he had some, I don't know, in my words, disagreement with some of the numbers in terms of traffic. The traffic's going to be what the traffic's going to be. I think we've heard both from McMahon and indirectly through McMahon that Vanessa has agreed with the numbers that have been put forward. So Dr. Bayetta's concerns notwithstanding, traffic isn't going to change. I think in terms of conditions, we can put in place something that perhaps addresses Dr. Bayetta's concerns, but I don't see anything changing. Either Dr. Bayetta is going to get another consultant to refute the two consultants that have already reviewed this, or we're going to be in the same place in 2 weeks that we are now, in which case we may as well vote on this.
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry. Can Dr. Bayetta give his opinion, and to this, wouldn't it be a school committee that would have to give their opinion, not Dr. Bayetta, as he is he's a employee, and if this is you guys are making this decision purely who isn't a citizen. I mean, I could be off base on that, and I think it might be a legal question, but
I believe he's the chairman of the school department, though, right? He's like the head of the chair of the school.
But no, he works through the school committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. That's correct.
But if I may, Dr. Bayetta has offered his own viewpoint on the project as it impacts school traffic. He also expressed concerns about, health, which I think we've addressed with some new information tonight. So I think that all due respect to the school committee, I don't think the school committee, unless they have individual expertise on traffic, is going to shed any more light on this than we as planning board members have. We're all relying on our respective consultants. Those consultants have said, and Dr. Bayetta implies that he disagrees or has issues with that information, unless he's going to produce another consultant who can shed further light on this. I don't know that we're going to be in any better position other than have delayed this another 2 weeks than we will than we are tonight. Again, if I thought something was going to concrete come out of delaying it, I'd be fine with it. But I think we'll be in the same place 2 weeks from now, and we may as well vote on this.
Okay.
Mr. Fernandez, if I may, Mr. Fernandez, if I may, just as a counter question or argument, if we at least had the direct voice or vocal feedback from Dr. Bayetta, to consider it. You know, I think moving to a vote and taking action then seems more appeasing, since he and the school committee are looking at the interest for the schools of Norton. You know, that being said, I wonder what is with that 2-week delay. You know, what's the risk in that two-week delay? Is there some loss to some process or system or activity, or is it for decision purposes? Are we against some timeline or some critical decision, or I don't know. And if that's the case, we can consider that. But I think, you know, if we have direct collaboration with him, and whether he's for or has some other rebuttal, we can at least then make an open vote where that discussion can be exhausted.
If I may, I have a very personal interest in Dr. Bader's concerns, because I have a grandson who goes to that school, and I'm sure there are members of the board who have children that go. I think we're all concerned with safety, be it health or impacts of traffic. My concern is that unless we're going to have, again, I don't have this email in front of me, but I'm paraphrasing. I believe he simply expressed disagreement with the traffic study without offering any concrete reasons as to why he disagreed, which then implies that he has to go out and get that concrete information before I give any more credence to his concern.
Okay.
I mean,
Joe, can I interject for a second?
Please.
I would, I'm not sure if we have been yelling his name loud enough on this meeting, but I believe Dr. Bader has actually joined the call this evening. So I don't know if you want to withdraw your motion for a moment, and let him speak to those concerns, and then we can hopefully move on with our lives.
Yeah, I don't think we have to withdraw the motion. I'd be glad to defer to Dr. Bader if he's on.
He's on. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Dr. Bader. Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Good evening. Yes, the phone has been ringing off the hook. You're in Stoughton, Massachusetts, where I reside. My apologies. It seems as though my comments are the debate. So let me just go back on a couple of things. I acted as a neighbor on behalf of the Yale School, as I have in any project that I've been asked by this planning board or prior planning boards that I've been as superintendent. Those comments were made in writing to Paul and the board months ago when this project, or whatever length it was. I'm not against the project at all. I am simply noting, nor do I believe to the prior speaker that I have a responsibility as a neighbor to go hire my own consultant. I'm simply stating that if you're there between the hours that I'm there, specifically with the exit and entrance both at the high school Yale and just the Yale, it's significant traffic issues. I've had discussions with the chief of police about trying to get more busing onto the school department because of our inability to get traffic flow in and out through there. Now, that's not an impact right now because I'm in COVID and I'm at 50% capacity with students and drop off on a daily basis, both at the Yale school entrance and at the what I call the high school Yale school entrance. So my comments are respective that I just don't agree with someone saying to me that the impact is minimal between 7 in the morning and 8 in the morning at the Yale school and the high school. It can be pretty significant pre-COVID in terms of traffic all the way back from the high school entrance all the way back past the Honeydew, because the road isn't wide enough and it's not made to be a passing road on the right side into a 2-lane. So if traffic is going, it's my understanding from what I saw from the charts, and I'm not an expert in that area either, to the prior comments, the exit entranceway at the Yale School only, which is currently a parent drop-off, parent pickup, because it used to be that the buses went in that way. We changed it because of the trying to get the buses out of the Yale School to go to the middle school quicker. Basically, that's what it came down to, by moving the crossing guard, which is not supposed to be used for cars, but just for buses or for children crossing the street, to the high school, Yale School exitway. I received an email from Paul today stating that there would be, I think it was first 2 weeks of school, AM and PM, police officer in order to do, I guess, get the school year started. I didn't respond to that. I don't have a problem with it. But I don't think that in the history of my dealing with planning boards that an individual person, or in this case, in my role, acting as the superintendent for a neighboring school, has to go out and hire their own consultant in order to go contrary to the consultant that's come forward with their traffic response study.
Thank you, Dr. Beda. We understand that point of view, certainly. We want to be respectful of your time. And thank you for joining at this late hour, obviously. Joe, is there anything, Joe and or Kevin, is there anything further that you wanted to raise at this point related to?
If I could address Dr. Beda, actually, you made my point. I did not, nor do I suggest, nor would I want you to go out and hire a traffic consultant. My concern throughout this process is that the applicant has obviously provided traffic information. That has been reviewed by our peer engineer who agrees with that information. And as I said earlier before you came on, the traffic is going to be what the traffic is. I mean, it's awful now. I personally and the applicant, his traffic engineer, and our review engineer has agreed that the presence of Cumberland Farm will primarily feed off that traffic rather than contribute to it. And I don't see any of that changing. And again, I hate to bring you in on as part of the discussion other than to acknowledge your concern, but I think that concern is shared by everyone who travels eastbound on 123 at 7 in the morning, travels northbound on Route 140 at 8 in the morning, travels southbound on 140 at 4:30 in the afternoon. It is what it is. None of the information that I've seen adds to that problem vis-a-vis Cumberland Farms. And to the extent that you bear your concerns, I very much appreciate them. I think we all have those concerns, but nothing is going to change. Thus, in terms of waiting another 2 weeks, thus, I think we can vote on this with the information that we have tonight, because it's not going to be enhanced in any way in 2 weeks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Scott. I would reiterate the last comment that Joe just made there. I would first to say, Dr. Beda, thanks for joining us late in your evening. I appreciate you joining us and your input. And to Joe, I think it's great that we're able to connect the dots there and at least open up that communication chain to make sure that we're not just jumping in and surpassing that feedback. So to Joey's point, I think we've made that connection. The opportunity is there, and I'm prepared to vote tonight as well.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, may I just respond to those comments? So,
please do.
Thank you. As somebody who goes to Cumberland Farms on a regular basis, I just want to be clear that this is not a personal issue for me at all. I was asked to respond as a neighbor for the Yale School. I did not have any insight as it pertains to other issues. I was asked, I did read the report way back in the beginning. I saw comments and numbers that I'll just respectfully say I don't agree with. I didn't know that your engineers have also agreed. And if the understanding is that the intent really also goes with what everybody believes is already a problem on 123 and it doesn't add to it, so be it.
Thank you. I believe that circles us back to the motion that we still have on the floor from Joe and Steve. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Or would you like me to take action on it? Orin, I see a hand.
If you're having a discussion on the motion, I'd like to just make 2 points. One, as I said, the issue of the tanks, just so I think the rest of the public needs to know, the underground tanks has really not been an issue that I think we've been focused on. I think we got clear information as to what was there and those risks. I think the things that I was raising were those other things for which they basically say they don't have the information on. These are the vapors. And I don't know. I read articles and they suggest a certain distance from the school, and I'm concerned with that. I certainly would relish the suggestion that was made to take, to get that information from the state. And if it's confirmed that it's minimal, it's not a problem, I can back away from that. But I'm looking at information that says basically you shouldn't be near a school. With regard to traffic, it's not anybody else. It's my own observation. I went and took account at the store at 246 Manchester Avenue. Now that's a store that's 3,600 feet and only has 8 pumps. So it's like, it's smaller. In a 1 hour period, I counted.
But it's also on a larger traffic road.
No, it's not, actually. If you look at the count, it's not a larger traffic road. Actually, West Main Street is a larger traffic road. But anyway, I counted in a 1 hour period, 298 cars total in and out, as opposed to the traffic count that they have for that same period of time is 178 cars over 2 hours. And I don't know how to address that. I understand what the standards are, but I'm talking the decision. I understand what the standards are, but I'm looking at the reality.
Thank you, Orin.
Orin, can I just interrupt there?
I think that Joe, hold on. I think Orin, I think your points have been made. I think there's more information that we'd like to have on a lot of things. I think that our job as members is to vote on the information that we have. If the information that we do not have sways our decision one way or another, then we can vote that way. Joe, is there anything else further that you wanted to add?
No, thanks.
Okay. Is there any further discussion from members of the board on the motion on the floor?
It's Julie. Can I just make one point
Please.
Quickly? I know everybody's getting to their max capacity here. Yes, thanks to Dr. Bayetta for jumping on, much appreciated. And I do hope this is the start of addressing all the comments in his email. Traffic was just one. So I do hope that no matter what the vote is tonight, that all of his issues are addressed and that a conversation is had based on some of the things I brought up, which he reiterated about some of the changes in traffic pattern. The crosswalk issue, I would still like to have you guys have a discussion with him about that, as well as some of the vapors that he brought up in the email. So I do hope that this moment in time does not surpass the earlier conversation in addressing his comments.
Thank you, Julie.
Mr. Chair, just to kind of answer Julie. Yeah, Julie, we hear you loud and clear, and we'll certainly get in touch with the superintendent so we can have those conversations.
Great. I think everybody on the board has had a chance to make comments on this motion, so I am going to, barring anything further in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to move forward with a vote on this motion that's been on the floor for a little while here. So hearing none, my order here is a little bit screwed up here, but I will start with Julie.
Can you just repeat the motion? I'm sorry.
The motion is to vote to approve the project for the use It does not cover the electronic message center at this
So
point.
it's for it's for this. It's the special permit for the use in the village commercial.
And then Joe just said subject to conditions, correct?
Subject to conditions, yes.
Okay. I will vote yes.
Thank you. Oren,
No.
Kevin,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. So that motion is approved, subject to conditions. Paul, we can work to evaluate condition. We can work to review conditions at a future meeting.
I'll start drafting the decision.
Yes. Are there any further motions on the floor? Since we did
So,
have two open.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you need a motion to either approve or deny a special permit for an electric message center in the village commercial.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
I believe Steve has moved already. Joe, if you don't mind seconding.
Well, actually, I do mind seconding it. There's some method to my madness, but I didn't realize Steve had already moved.
Go ahead, Joe. I'll withdraw.
I'd like to table this only because, and let me just back up a little bit. I've been very impressed by the applicant's response to our concerns about the aesthetic of the downtown. They've agreed to change some coloring on the fencing. They've repositioned the building to accommodate off sidewalk traffic. So I trust they realize that I appreciate what they've attempted to do. One of my concerns has been the size of the sign, given both the slight curve of the road and the proximity to the center of town. I had mentioned that Cumberland Farms built a relatively new, now it's about a year and a half old, store at Hart's Corner in Taunton. They built more recently one in Rentham with an even smaller sign. My concern has always been the size of the sign. God knows that I want to see the Cumberland Farms there. I don't think the size of the sign will in any way impact their store volume. I think a smaller sign can serve both purposes, i.e. our concern, or at least my concern for the aesthetic, and their concern to get messages out to their customers. So my thought would be to table the decision on the sign such that they could look at their Rentham location and mimic that sign. And if that sign is too small, I'd be fine with the one at Hart's Corner. But the one that they're proposing to me is too large.
I guess, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Joe, for your comment.
I just want to understand from the planning board member what size sign he's thinking about, because as everybody may recall, we did receive a variance probably almost 2 years ago at this point for a larger sign. I think it was 14 feet in height and up to 68 square feet in area. And then we had conceded, looks like I'm reading the decision, March of last year to reduce the height of that freestanding sign to 12 feet. And I just, to get a better sense, and I did the Rentham project, so I can look back to see exactly, what that is, and I'm going to try to do that right now. But just, I don't know, I just want to make sure that he was thinking of the most current concession that we had made.
Well,
for that
I
sign.
appreciate that, Tom, because I believe the Hart's Corner is 12 feet. The Rentham sign I didn't measure. It's even smaller, but if we're at 12 feet, I think that's okay. I prefer the Rentham sign because, again, it's even smaller. And I just don't think you need, and I don't think it does you any benefit to have a larger sign. And you've got a 60-foot canopy with green striping that everyone's going to know what that is.
Okay, so the current plan is for a 12-foot sign. So do we have a motion on the floor or do we not?
Right now, you have a motion on the floor to table this.
No, actually, there was no motion. Steve made a motion, and I just
And then
started.
he
And then he
withdrew it.
withdrew, and
And
he
then you just
suggested
made a motion.
tabling it.
Yeah, you just made a motion to table it, Joe.
I suggested it, but
Oh, okay.
again, if that works mechanically for the applicant, I don't think you're. Yeah, I'll move to table this a decision on the sign until the meeting on the 2nd.
There is a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
This is
Or Scott can. He or I, either one. Dealer's choice.
Julie for the second.
oh,
No offense,
you
Scott.
stole. All right. Fair
Ladies
enough.
first.
Okay. Are there any further
sir.
comments on this motion on the floor? Hearing none, I will go to a vote of the members. Julie,
Yes.
Oren,
Yes.
where am I have my list here? Kevin,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and I will vote yes to make it unanimous. So we have tabled and or so that's being tabled. Is that actually under a different special permit number, Paul? Is that 491?
It's the same number. The only one that had a different number was the underground tank in Zone 3.
Okay.
Which you would approve, which the board approved previously.
So do we need a more official motion to continue this special permit discussion?
You're gonna have to, you voted on the special permit for use, so you have to issue a decision on that. So I would, I mean, the number is the application number. It's for internal, it's for internal tracking. The registry will take the decision as long as it's special permit, that doesn't matter. So, you tabled a vote, which means you're continuing this public hearing we
just tried to do two things at the same time, which don't work well with each other.
because you can't continue. So you're going to continue the public hearing for the purposes of only, Tom, you can't find Rentham? You can't get the.
I'm pulling it up right now, so give me a second.
So, Mr. Chairman and Planner, I was just curious. There may be some other people curious as well. We're looking at a special permit number and 2 items tied to it, is my understanding, right? And one of those
You're looking at
has.
one. The number isn't as important. It's the public hearing. So you have one public hearing open on a remand for two separate votes. And you already made one vote. It would just be a lot cleaner if we could wrap it all up. So if Tom has the size, maybe we could. If not, we'll figure out a way. It's not.
Okay, great.
So,
okay.
So if not, what we'll do is we're going to continue this. You're going to continue the public hearing for limited continued discussion regarding the size of the sign, and that would be it.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you do that? Just because I'm not sure that I have the latest.
Understood.
Okay.
Right
So I would just have Joe.
I'd be looking for a motion to that effect.
Yeah, a motion to continue the hearing for the limited purposes of investigating the size of the sign.
So moved.
Second.
So there's already a motion on the table, right?
No.
I consider that a friendly amendment to the motion.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So we still need everybody to vote on that.
You do.
So I will go again with the roll. Julie,
Yes.
Oren,
Yes.
Kevin, Kevin, we're looking for a additional vote on this.
I responded to him. I must be too far away from the mic. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Scott,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Okay.
So that's that. Just to clarify, that's being continued to February 2nd at 7:15.
Correct.
Okay. That's just part of the motion. And then just so you're aware, Mr. Chairman, I'm not available that night. I think that this is simply just Mr. Reedy's going to come in with some facts, and then the board's just going to choose on a sign size. So you won't need me. Okay.
I agree. Thank you very much. Okay. That closes our discussion for this evening on 60 West Main Street. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. The next item on the agenda is 227 Main Street. And the applicant, I saw Paul this earlier today, requested a continuance as well.
Yes,
And they would be looking for the 2 weeks out as well.
right to February 2nd.
Okay.
So we just need a motion on.
Motion to continue said applicant
Special permit 6956.
as the chairman stated, to February 2nd.
At 7:15. That's the time,
7:15.
date and time. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott, for the
7:15.
motion. And Oren, was that you with the second?
Yes, I'm seconding it. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will start with Julie.
Yes.
Oren,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Sorry, got you out of order. Joe,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. That closes the public hearing section of today's meeting. We do have one more item on the agenda. Paul, I'm not sure if that agenda item is still going to happen this evening, given the hour.
They're here, and I think I'll leave it to them. But there's a timing issue here with the state property. So I see Tom is on the call, and I know Craig from MassDOT is here as well.
Okay. We apologize to both of you that we've forced you to listen to us for 3.5 hours tonight. But if you're ready, we're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We will be quick. As Paul noted, a little bit of timing associated with this, perhaps with a potential action at this coming town meeting in the springtime. If I can I share my screen and do a quick presentation?
You should be able to, yes.
Okay, very good. Where is the screen? You can see my screen?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So in the spirit of brevity, again, my name is Tom Cox. I work for a company called Greystone. We provide real estate services to the MBTA and the MassDOT. Real estate services being disposition of properties, asset management, collection of rents, et cetera, on the MBTA side. We also have on the phone with me today Craig McEwen from the Office of Real Estate at MassDOT, and Zach Worth, who is part of my team at Greystone. Rewinding a couple of years ago, MassDOT was approached by the town or some town officials about the potential repurposing of its property, which is shown here. This is basically your all GIS system. It's approximately 36.9 acres that's located along 495 and Route 123. And when MassDOT was approached by officials at the town hall about this, the thought process was, could MassDOT potentially repurpose all or a substantial portion of its property in with the idea of creating economic development, tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera. As part of those discussions, it was noted that our property is zoned residential, and that's perhaps not what the community would be immediately looking for. Is more housing, and that perhaps something along the line of industrial or commercial would be more appropriate, more palatable to the town. Again, with the original thought process of repurposing a portion or all of MassDOT's property for economic development purposes. To which MassDOT has pretty much responded favorably and said, we're willing to have that discussion kind of with the town if that's what the town is asking us to do. So, and again, quickly, MassDOT has about 37 acres. It's here, it fronts on 495 and 123. We also have a active MassDOT operation here. These two buildings you see here are salt sheds. We also have some trailers which people are stationed to on a daily basis, and it's also an area used for lay down, basically as part of the district. So when it snows out, the salt sheds are used. When there's various projects that are occurring in this region of the Commonwealth, the property is used for management purposes, lay down, et cetera. As you can see, the MassDOT's operations are strategically located probably where a roadway would go, to the extent that the site was redeveloped, whether it's for the underlying housing or for commercial purposes. So the thought process here is, to the extent that MassDOT participated in this, it would have to be a big enough project, lack of better description, that would allow for the funding of the relocation of MassDOT's operations on site. So MassDOT's operations are active, and there isn't a plan at this point in time to relocate them off the site. So the thought process is to create a big enough parcel of land that would have enough economic development value to again relocate those uses that are on site. You'd think that they're pretty easy to relocate, or they're a pretty cheap process. It's really not. We don't have an exact number, but you know, it's probably to the tune of you know, million or millions of dollars. So MassDOT doesn't have the funds like every other municipality or state agency to pay for these funds. So the project would have to absorb that. So again, these 30 some odd 37 acres. I should note before I stop my little presentation here is that a portion of this site, approximately 7 acres, which is this parcel here that I've highlighted, is subject to a care and control agreement with Commonwealth's Wildlife Division, along with other parcels of land down in this area, what have you. So we MassDOT have had discussions with that group preliminarily about potentially relocating this. We need to get more information about exactly how they came to have control of this property. So there's a lot of diligence needs to occur. But the thought process here, and I can show it, you know, on this quick presentation here, is to potentially relocate that property line so that it abuts the Canoe River, also connects in with the town-owned parcel of land that's to the north or to the top of this plan. I'm not sure exactly it's north. You know, to create a more rectangular or a more square property that would be available for long-term development purposes. So that's it. I know it's 10:48. I tried to keep it high level, knowing that we're probably going to have multiple discussions over the next couple of months if we can meet the goal of hitting this year's town meeting. But that's it at 30,000 feet in the Reader's Digest version. Craig, before I turn it over to you, Paul, or Mr. Chairman, Craig, is there anything that I missed in this quick presentation I just gave?
Maybe on mute.
Sorry. No, that was good talk. Thank you. Thank you for listening, guys.
So with that, happy to you know, answer any questions. And Mr. Chairman, I'll keep this this graphic up on the screen for reference purposes.
Thank you. Do you have any members of the board who have questions regarding this project at this time? Understanding that we're not looking to take action on it at this point, it's for early informational purposes.
Tim, I have a couple.
Go for it.
One, Paul, is this material on the Dropbox, or did I just miss it?
I have Tom, if you can get it to me, we'll get it into Dropbox.
Awesome. That would be great. Is this like another, sorry, I'm lacking some coherency at this point, but has this been like a conversation that just came about recently, Tom, or is this something you guys have been talking about like for 5 years or 5 months or 5 days?
So I think it's fair to say that we've been talking about it for a couple of years. It was put on not necessarily kind of on hold, but MassDOT has a lot of projects, and a lot of requests, a lot of different communities ask for us. So we met at the site, I think, about 1.5 years ago, and then the discussions resumed last fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just for my edification, the goal would be to go to town meeting to get the parcels rezoned, or to come to some financial agreement between us and MassDOT for the sale? Or is this like a multi-step process where we're going to have to go to town meeting more than once? Does anybody kind of have that outline?
Yeah, definitely good questions. So the thought process here is that the relationship with the town, if you will, through this process would be to rezone the parcels of land, and then MassDOT would put it out to bid. Like other municipalities or state agencies, we have a whole procurement process that we have to go through. So we would manage that, we would control that, we meaning MassDOT. But knowing that the underlying zoning is residential and the community is seeking to have more, I mean, we heard it on the last phone call, or the last hearing, is additional economic development to support the tax base. So the immediate step, if you will, for the town's perspective would be a consideration of a rezoning of this parcel of land. I've neglected to say that the request right now is for industrial, in which I can kind of just, and again, this is your all GIS process. Let's turn on quickly the zoning map here. So this purple is your industrial zoning district. The red is commercial, and you can see our property is presently zoned residential. So I apologize, a little long-winded there, but hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's very helpful. So sidebar, in my professional capacity, I work for the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. So I'm very, in tune with the property disposal process. So assuming you guys would have to go out to auction or to sell the property, I was just trying to make sure that we understood kind of the steps, because if it goes out to sale, that it's whoever I'm assuming might be the low bid. So it's going to go to whoever is the winner of that, sale or that auction. So
that's correct.
Yeah. So just kind of thinking through the process and being knowledgeable of, kind of what the steps are, and then what could potentially happen to the property should it, leave MassDOT's hands. So I appreciate that. And if we can get the materials, the presentation, we'll be able to take a look at it, and that would be helpful too. So thanks. I'm good, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. While we wait for any more questions, can you throw a street name layer on that if that's available to you?
Yes.
Just to it's one of those
Well, if you, Tom, if
don't
you
want to trust my brain.
Tom, if you turn off the zoning and then zoom in, because you're right, this is across the street from Blue Star. So that's Leonard Street where Tom is highlighting it.
Yeah.
And 123.
Does that line up with the light that's going to be at that intersection with Leonard Street?
It does not.
That parcel that little parcel, is that owned by the town or is that owned by some privately owned?
The little parcel, good question. The little parcel, which is shown here, with the 78, it's my understanding that that's owned by the town. It was an old schoolhouse based upon our research.
Okay, because other than that, because there's going to be a traffic light at Leonard Street, and there'll be a traffic light just getting to 495, and there's going to be no way of making a left-hand turn coming off of 495 into your side other than through that traffic light. So that may be something you want to look at to see if you can match up the use of that traffic light.
Definitely.
Which is going to be configured for a right turn dominant setup now because of the industrial park going in there.
Yeah, anyway, there's this, I don't know, you can be able to get in and out. Anyways, but okay, thank you.
You could adjust that though. You know, you can
Yeah.
look at just different
Oh,
heads
yeah.
on the signals and stuff like that. But Oren has a good point of thinking about, you know, if it is to look to be developed in a commercial industrial manner, you know, that lineup, it would be a, you know, a smart move to turn it into a 4-way intersection.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any further comments from members of the board?
Yeah, so this is Joe. I assume mechanically, I think the warrant closes for this Springtown meeting February 1st. Paul, are we looking to submit something, in which case you need a vote from us tonight to forward something for the warrant prior to February 1st?
I think that would be a great thing because the town manager did say the town would submit on behalf of MassDOT for this. So,
And
So
Paul,
we are
that would
looking-
come from us and not, let's say, the select board or whoever initiated the conversation with MassDOT.
that's a great question. I think we have the ability to submit without, the town has the ability to submit without board approval or recommendation. It's always nice, like what we did with the Village Center earlier this year. You voted to support it, and I think that, you know, that carries some weight with it.
So we are looking for to submit for Springtown meeting. So
Yes.
right now. Okay.
But I do want to point out we did not put that on the agenda for to take action tonight. It's just a discussion, but we can certainly get back and see if you because February 1st is the placeholder. It's the placeholder language, and we can go ahead and submit it as a town department.
Is that property in a zone 2? You know, how is it?
It probably is. Tom, if you can click on where it says water resource protection. Okay, so a portion of it is.
Okay. Makes it a little bit messy for some industrial.
The same thing as, you know, all of Blue Star was in zone 2, so.
I know.
You know.
So since this is a rezoning request, do we need to notify butters and have a public hearing around this?
We will, yeah, yes.
We have to do that prior to submitting an article for the town meeting?
No, it'll be prior to your first public hearing, which is in, I believe it's in late March. I have to look at the calendar. I know I was planning out a schedule for this, and I wrote down March 23rd would be the first public hearing. So, but I have to confirm that we've set dates that far. But we would send the notices out 2 weeks prior to your first public hearing and put signs in the ground.
We do have a member of the Board of Selectmen on the call here, who's volunteering to talk and speak to that.
Actually, not about the warrant per se, but I wanted to just talk about the economic development. This piece of property has been looked at extensively over the last couple of years by a couple of different developers. I know that the legislation has gotten involved to try to work with DOT and so forth to try to develop this piece of land. I'm excited that it's now we're getting to a point where it may become fruition for the town meeting. So, but this has been discussed by, I know, Mr. Rich, who butts the lands, to some other companies in town that have shown interest in developing this land.
Development community knows that we're having these discussions, and we've received a bunch of interest. So we're trying to hold them back a little bit, lack of better description. But yeah, it's a great spot. You know, obviously right off the highway, 123. There's not going to be a lack of market interest if and when this gets put out. So.
And Mr. Chair, one more point. I know that Renee and myself have just talked about this because we're both on the EDC, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Lay, but I'm pretty sure that she would be supporting this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Toole.
Tim, since this isn't on the agenda in terms of actually taking a vote, and since I believe the warrant closes February 1st, I certainly wouldn't have any heartburn if Paul took it upon himself to submit to the Board of Selectmen a placeholder article for rezoning of this parcel. That's not obviously a motion, just a thinking out loud.
Thank you, Joe, for your kind thoughts.
So
I
thinking
think-
out loud, I would support that as well under the discussion category as on the agenda.
Okay. So I think that it does make sense to continue discussions around this parcel leading into the annual town meeting here. And we would look to, if this is on the warrant, to properly notify abutters and have a public hearing in advance of that. Paul, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, and also if just thinking out loud and it's 11 o'clock, would it make sense? Might the board want to see this even before the official meeting where you're actually, voting to recommend for town meeting? I don't know if you wanted to come back in February to see that, to see this, or
I think it makes sense to set up, I think maybe the discussion around whether we would recommend this article will also involve possibly some discussion with the IDC. So maybe we can coordinate with them, or at least to get a statement from them about, as a committee, about the parcel itself. So if we want to coordinate that internally, and then we can set the stage appropriately and keep all our ducks in a row heading toward town meeting.
Okay, I can work with Michael because I'm working more with the EDC as well.
Yeah, and that'll make sense. That'll give us the perspective from the people who've been looking at this for much longer than we have, so that when we have those discussions with abutters and everything, it all makes sense.
I do believe that he represents, if you were to count all the abutters on one hand, there's only one really. Other than the town of Norton. The Commonwealth owns everything surrounding it. And we sold the town itself, the 10 acres that flank it in the middle. And I think the Alden Group is the other one.
Because I won't speak to, I'll let Paul and the rest of town staff pull the abutters list based on what's required for zoning amendments. If it's a short list, it's a short list, and that saves us some effort. But we can move forward from that perspective.
We certainly want to be, in thinking about the October town meeting when we had the discussion on signs. I mean, we want to be more transparent,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and obviously we have Red Mill right within a stone's throw. We have the condos nearby, so we want people to be aware of it. So,
yeah, exactly.
Tim, one note if I may.
Please.
So I think we should definitely see it before kind of the official process happens, even though this is something not as involved as some of the other, town articles we've put forth. I think we've learned that process works best for us, even if it doesn't necessarily have to go to the zoning bylaw subcommittee or anything like that, to be able to, get a preview of the presentation, make some comments, address things that we think the public would like to hear, I think is only to our benefit, and being transparent, putting a full picture forward and our best foot forward. So I think that we should continue to, have that practice be a part of our normal, order of business going forward on articles for town meeting.
I agree that when it makes sense, it's always good to have a full picture of what is happening. So I think that makes sense when we have the runway to do so. Absent that, there is nothing else on the agenda for this evening, unless we have anything further to discuss on this project. I'm not sure if we do. So I'm just going to.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Tim.
Kevin. Go
Just
ahead.
one question. So the placeholder will be generic where vote to approve rezoning of these parcels, because I think there's value in discussing whether we want to rezone them commercial versus industrial, because there are uses that are allowed in commercial that are not allowed in industrial. And most uses, even in the Condon Industrial Park, can be built as they are developing that land in the commercial zone. So maybe for a future meeting, we can discuss that.
I think that having that language be as vague as possible, as you suggested, makes sense. To not limit it to industrial and or commercial zoning.
Perfect. Thank you.
So other than that, I'm just going to stand here and not speak, unless there's any other motion that's going to happen on the table.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Julie, for the motion.
Scott will second.
Thank you, Scott, for the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will go to the vote. Oren.
Yes.
Julie.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Kevin, I think you may have stepped a little bit far away from the mic. I could not hear you.
Yes, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
And I will vote emphatically yes. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention this evening. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.